Chapter 486. After a meal, Su Li got the information she wanted from Xian An. The treasure map in Jin Zhentian's hand had been broken in advance a few years ago and became a relic that everyone could go in and explore. In the first 2 years after the relic was opened, it was really a reign of terror. Xian An sighed. There are many tombs that have not been explored. Although there are many dangers, treasures and spiritual materials that are not common in the outside world can be seen everywhere. All the practitioners who thought they had a little cultivation went crazy. The drama of killing each other for treasures was staged there every day. For this reason, at least 20% of the practitioners in Jindan realm in the Jiuli region were killed. However, few practitioners above Yuanying realm died. If no one targeted them, there were many who escaped by relying on Yuanying realm. Su Li heard this with interest and asked with a smile, "You said it so deeply. Have you seen it with your own eyes?" Xian An scratched his head embarrassedly. "I don't have that ability. I heard it from my father. And at that time, my father was afraid that I would run around, so he grounded me for 3 years." Speaking of this, an extremely deep fear flashed in his eyes, as if he had a lingering fear of those 2 years of closed-door reflection. "Your father is also for your own good." Su Li fiddled with the wine glass in her hand. Although practitioners transcend the realm of mortals, they only have one life. If they lose their life, they will have nothing. Xian An looked at Su Li in a daze and was puzzled. Wasn't she inexperienced in the world? How could she say such profound words? Su Li quickly realized the whole flaw and stuck out her tongue playfully. "This is what my master said. Now I present it to the Buddha with borrowed flowers. Please don't be offended." No, I think it makes sense." The doubts in Xian An's heart dissipated, and he waved his hand. "I didn't understand my father's behavior before. Now after hearing what you said, I understand a little. It's great that junior sister can help." Su Li responded with joy. Xian An saw that she looked sincere and didn't seem to be fake, and he was also moved. He completely let down his guard against her. The atmosphere was silent for a moment, and Su Li broke it with a slightly shy smile. "Senior fellow apprentice, I want to go to the relic to have a look. Can you lead the way?" "This." Xian An hesitated for a moment, but when he saw the disappointment between Su Li's eyebrows, he immediately gritted his teeth and grinned. Of course. This was the 5th year since the relic had been opened. It was no longer that dangerous. "I went there once with my father, but if you want me to take you there, you must listen to me and not run around. Otherwise, I won't be able to save you if you encounter danger," Xian An warned seriously. After Su Li nodded repeatedly, the itinerary to the relics was finally settled. After that, the two of them booked a room in an inn and agreed to depart the next day. After dinner, Su Li saw that Xian An's face was more excited than she pretended to be. She couldn't help laughing secretly. In the end, he was still a young man. She could see at a glance that Xian An's age was no more than 500 years old, but his cultivation could reach the peak of Jindan realm. Even if he couldn't be compared with an Evildor, he was definitely a genius at the level of Tianjiao. Shaking her head, Su Li pushed the door into the room. The moment she closed the door, the runes of the tactical matrix flowed between the cracks of the door. In the blink of an eye, the whole room was blocked. The advantage of a practitioner's inn was that every room had an isolation tactical matrix. Although the grade was not high, as long as it was not deliberately destroyed, no one would come to disturb. After checking the room and confirming that there was no hidden trap left by the innkeeper, Su Li went to the inner room and sat cross-legged on the silk futon. She waved her hand, and the shadow behind her squirmed. After a while, there was another Su Li in the room. Su Li looked at the face of her previous life and frowned, but she didn't deliberately correct it. Every time she summoned the evil ghost, it appeared with the face of the previous life. Even if she corrected it, it would return to the original appearance next time. So, she simply didn't bother to care about it. With a slight sigh, Su Li threw out a set of clothes for the evil ghost to put on. Then the evil ghost walked to the futon on the side and sat cross-legged, entering the state of enlightenment. Little Su Li, this Black Lotus, came out of the ring in surprise, and released the little white fox who had been suffocated for too long to breathe fresh air. Can the evil ghost still practice by itself? After Black Lotus asked this, Su Li couldn't help raising her eyebrows. Can't it? How is it possible? The evil ghost has no intelligence. As soon as the words came out, the evil ghost, who was still looking for the feeling, suddenly opened its eyes and looked at Black Lotus coldly. Black Lotus suddenly shivered and was horrified. He weakly explained, "That. I am ignorant and ill-informed. Please don't take it to heart." Ho ho ho. As soon as the words came out, Su Li suddenly chuckled. Black Lotus looked back at her with a dumbfounded face, and then turned to look at the evil ghost who ignored him. Suddenly, he reacted and became angry. "Su Li, are you kidding me?" Su Li's smile was slightly restrained, and she said meaningfully, "What did you call me?" Black Lotus's scalp was numb, and he immediately gave in. "Forget it. Let's not argue with a madman." "That. Master, what the hell is going on? I have never seen such an evil ghost." Su Li stared at Black Lotus's face and found that his reaction didn't seem to be fake. She stopped joking and shook her head. "Even you don't know." "How can I know? I only need to separate a trace of thought to integrate with the evil ghost, and the evil ghost will have its own intelligence. It can even act by itself, practice by itself, and comprehend the mental method and secret method by itself. As for the enlightenment of the evil ghost, it will be received by me at the moment when I withdraw that trace of thought, as if it was born to practice by itself. Is there such a good thing?" Black Lotus was stunned. "Isn't it equivalent to two of you practicing at the same time? With your talent, if you speed up your practice, won't it be against the natural order? It's not the same." Su Li said with pity, "I have tried it. When I withdraw the enlightenment and practice of the evil ghost, I will lose half of it, which is much slower than my own practice. You should be satisfied." Black Lotus rolled his eyes. "I have never seen such a good thing like you. If the previous generations of the body of evil ghost got such a talent, they would have been crazy with joy." "Talent?" Su Li was surprised and murmured thoughtfully, "This is not my awakened talent, or, it may be part of my talent." "This is not all?" Black Lotus's eyes were wide open, as if his eyeballs were going to pop out. Su Li replied softly, but she didn't intend to continue to say. Black Lotus was itching in his heart, but he didn't dare to force Su Li to say it. He could only pout, put the little white fox into the ring, and sulk alone. Woo, woo, woo. Tilda the little white fox nested in the ring space and looked at Black Lotus aggrievedly. She wanted to be with her master. Uncle Black was a big bad guy. The night passed slowly as Su Li and the evil ghost comprehended the Sueyu tactics at the same time. It was a silent night. In the morning of the next day, Xianan got up and opened the door, but he saw Su Li sitting at the table downstairs, enjoying the spiritual tea prepared by the inn. He immediately went downstairs and sat down at Su Li's table. He said embarrassedly, "Junior sister apprentice, you came earlier than me. I'm really ashamed." Su Li smiled and pushed another cup of tea to Xianan. "It's a joke. I was so excited that I didn't sleep all night. I want to see what the relics look like. Haha." Xianan couldn't help laughing. "Junior sister apprentice, you are really interesting. But when I just went down the mountain, I was almost the same as you." Black Lotus yawned in the ring space. When he heard the conversation between the two, he couldn't help but roll his eyes. "You acted so real. You are more than 2,000 years old, but you still have the nerve to pretend to be young. You dare to speak ill of the master. I heard it all." The voice of reincarnation sounded leisurely, and Black Lotus instantly jumped up. He glared at the spirit of reincarnation mirror that suddenly appeared in the ring space. "You damn donkey, how dare you appear in front of me?" When the phantom of the little beast heard Black Lotus's words, its old face suddenly darkened. "Why do you always mention the old things?" "Tut!" Black Lotus sneered, "You still dare to show up. Aren't you afraid that Su Li still holds a grudge and grinds your bones into ashes?" The little critter shuddered, and its phantom image swayed, but it quickly stabilized. It said in a muffled voice, "Master had noticed me a long time ago, but she didn't make a move. I was completely refined by her blood. If she dies, I will be destroyed once again. In this way, she is not afraid of my betrayal at all. As long as I serve the master with all my heart and shield her from nature's mysteries, there is nothing to be afraid of." At the same time, the little beast was still a little unconfident, but its attitude still made Black Lotus gnash his teeth with hatred. Also, my strength has recovered a little after swallowing the fragments. You and I are originally one, so it is easy for me to come here. I heard you speak ill of the master just now, and I can't turn a blind eye. As soon as the words came out, Black Lotus's face instantly darkened, and he scolded, "Come on, hurt each other. If Su Li is angry and crazy, none of us can survive." The little beast looked at Black Lotus's collapse with a blank face, feeling wronged. What did he say? He just said what he thought. Why did Black Lotus seem to be stimulated? He didn't know that before he woke up, there was a scene where Su Li killed herself to force Black Lotus to show up. Let's not talk about the movement in the ring first. Under the guidance of Xian En, Su Li went out of the city all the way to the north. The speed was not fast. Xian En also took the opportunity to tell Su Li about the current situation of Qingshui Circle. After all, it was his duty as a senior fellow apprentice to popularize the current situation of the cultivation circle. Su Li wanted to ask in a roundabout way, but she didn't expect Xian En to be so tactful. She immediately slowed down her speed again and again. Compared with the current situation of the sects in Qingshui Circle, Mushure spiritual jade became less important. The Jojo region was a place where the news was blocked. Even if she could buy a lot of information from Enchanting, it was only the superficial situation. All the things about her were regarded as secrets by the sects. It was too difficult to know through Enchanting. The most convenient way was to find a person who was really born in the rich and powerful circle to ask. However, with her sensitive identity, it was difficult to find a suitable person. Fortunately, when she came to find Mushure spiritual jade this time, she really met one by chance. Chapter 487. Nowadays, the cultivation circle is led by the four holy sects, Shengtian Shrine, Ankue Valley, Huangxing Hall, and Tianhe sect. Many holy sects with deep foundations are respected. Xianen said while flying and leading the way, as if he had been in the secular world for many years and had rich experience. In fact, he just repeated what his father told him to Su Li. However, Xianen's vanity was greatly satisfied when he saw Su Li's serious listening look. Among the four holy sects, the most powerful one is Shengtian Shrine, which is inclined to the evil sect. When Xianen mentioned Shengtian Shrine, his eyes flashed with disgust, but Shengtian Shrine has survived from the ancient cultivation era to the present. I don't know how many terrible means it has accumulated, and it has a deep friendship with many old monsters of cultivation, including Fate Ancestor. Fate Ancestor? Su Li repeated, showing curiosity. Who is Fate Ancestor? Why do you mention him? You don't even know Fate Ancestor? Xianen turned his head, and his eyes widened slightly. Junior sister apprentice, how does your master popularize the common sense of the cultivation circle to you? It's too irresponsible. Su Li blinked embarrassedly. Senior fellow apprentice, to be honest, this time I sneaked out. What? Xianen said in surprise, and then rolled his eyes. He scolded angrily, the people in the cultivation circle are sinister. How can you sneak down the mountain? Fortunately, you met me. If something bad happens to you, your master and senior fellow apprentices will be worried. Su Li's beautiful eyes showed a lingering fear, and she nodded very sincerely. Senior fellow apprentice, you are right. But I have come out this time. I can't go back empty-handed, can I? Besides, I have you to accompany me. Xianen was angry and amused, but he remembered that he had sneaked down the mountain more than once many years ago. His character was lively, but his parents were calm. He didn't know whose character he took after. Forget it. Xianen waved his hand helplessly. In this case, I will be your guide for a period of cultivation. But after going to the relics, you must promise me that you will immediately go back to the sect to keep your master safe. Senior fellow apprentice, you are right. Su Li nodded repeatedly and finally calmed down Xianen's emotions. He organized his words and continued, speaking of Fate Ancestor, it is a unique title in Qingshui Circle. I heard that it has been passed down to this day, and no one knows how many people have replaced it. No one knew the specific origin of the fate ancestor of this generation. His cultivation was just junior emperor, but he was regarded as the leader of Qingshui Circle by many practitioners, not because of anything else, but because he walks the Tao of heavenly secret. Tianji. Su Li's eyes flickered slightly. She didn't say much and continued to listen. The Tao of heavenly secrets is not the same as the Tao of divination. It is a great Tao that allows one to see the destiny of a person and even the future of the entire world of cultivators. Xian'an's eyes lit up. I heard from my father that not everyone can walk on the Tianji path. Those who pry into the secrets of the heavens will be punished by the heavens. If an ordinary cultivator were to cultivate the Tao of heavenly secrets, their lifespans would definitely be shortened. However, there is also a group of people with special constitutions who can live longer by cultivating the Tao of heavenly secrets. They might even be favored by the heavenly Tao. Su Li pursed her lips and saw the envy in Xian'an's eyes. Be on the same side as the heavenly axiom? Wasn't that her enemy? The reason why the fate ancestor of this generation is respected is because of two major contributions. Xian'an's voice suddenly became high-spirited. The first major contribution is that he and the great emperor of Lihan prevented the invasion of the alien realm and set up the Lihan tablet. So that outsiders could not enter, he protected the peace of Qingshui Circle for 10,000 years. The second major contribution is that he killed the daughter of luck of this generation. Su Li's pupils shrank slightly, and her voice was indeed normal. Senior fellow apprentice, what is the daughter of luck? Why did you kill her? Xian'an immediately explained the daughter of luck to Su Li, and said naturally, the fate ancestor once said that the daughter of luck violated the natural law, and the natural law would be angry. Then, Qingshui Circle would be destroyed. How could the words of such a big shot be wrong? Look at Su Li, the daughter of luck 1,000 years ago. Because of her appearance, more than 80% of the talents of Qingshui Circle died, which led to the shortage of talents on the list of 10,000 talents. It was a great disaster. Su Li narrowed her eyes, and a black light flashed in her pupils. In the previous life, she was born in a muddle, lived in a muddle, and died in a muddle. It turned out that in the eyes of the world, it was actually her fault. By the way, Xian'an suddenly clapped his hands, and subconsciously lowered his tone. Speaking of the daughter of luck, I eavesdropped on the conversation between my father and an elder 2 days ago. The fate ancestor suddenly appeared a month ago and issued a decree. The daughter of luck of the new generation appeared again. Su Li was stunned for a moment, and asked, the descendant of the ghost clan in Ghost Region? That's her. Xian'an looked excited, and almost fell off the flying sword. According to the prediction of the fate ancestor, the daughter of luck of this generation is extraordinary and much more difficult to deal with than the holy girl Su. She is not only the daughter of luck, but also the taboo of the ghost clan that has long been extinct. She has the body of evil ghost, and her means are unpredictable. Now the entire Qingshui Circle has issued a wanted order. As long as anyone finds the whereabouts of the descendant of the ghost clan and reports it to the truth, he will get an extremely generous reward. Su Li's face was slightly pale. Following Xian'an's words, she naturally showed fear. There is such a terrible person in the cultivation circle. We practitioners should work together to kill the demon. Junior sister apprentice, you are right. Now that the chaos in the cultivation circle has just emerged, it is the time for us to show our skills. Looking at Xian'an's complacent appearance, Su Li's eyes flashed with a gloomy cloud. Her lips were slightly raised, and she showed an indescribable evil intention. It turned out that her identity had been found to such a situation. If Xian'an hadn't pointed it out, she would still be in the dark. If she used that identity to act again, it was likely that all her previous efforts would be in vain. Fortunately, she was delayed by Zisho's affairs, and she never appeared in the eyes of the holy sects again. In this way, Zisho was her benefactor. Su Li laughed in her heart. Black Lotus, as you said, I am a mouse that everyone in the cultivation circle wants to beat. But I am not the body of evil ghost, but the daughter of luck in the previous life. Black Lotus sensed the chill in her mind and shrank his head. He didn't dare to respond for fear of angering her. The spirit of reincarnation mirror didn't dare to say anything. Although it was an accomplice of the fate ancestor and the group of people in the previous life, it did do it after all. Oh! The little white fox lying on the side of Black Lotus pricked up its ears and looked around in confusion. Why was the master angry? Junior sister apprentice. Junior sister apprentice. Xian'an's voice pulled Su Li back to reality. Su Li raised her head, and the haze in her eyes faded away instantly. She smiled sweetly. Senior fellow apprentice, I'm fine. I just listened to the strange people and things that you said, and I was lost in thought. Hey, that's all in the future. Our cultivation is still weak now. If the descendant of the ghost clan really shows up to do evil, someone will punish her. Su Li responded obediently when she heard the words, and said, My sect is not strong. I have heard of the Tianjiao list that you mentioned, but I don't know much about it. Can you explain it to me in detail? That's not difficult. Xian'an waved his hand, but his finger pointed to the endless black ruins under the dark clouds ahead. However, we have already arrived at the relics. The periphery is not dangerous. Why don't we explore the periphery now? I will tell you. How about it? The smile on Su Li's face became more gentle, and her voice was crisp like the cry of an empty valley. Senior fellow apprentice, you are really a good person. Xian'an was suddenly praised, and he subconsciously scratched his head. His face was slightly red, and he giggled. Jiguang sect was the second largest sect in Zhouli region. Xian Jingju, the lord of Jiguang sect, was a legendary cultivator in Zhouli region. Although Xian Jingju was the legitimate son of the previous lord of Jiguang sect, he only had ordinary low-grade spiritual root, and his cultivation speed was far less than that of his peers. The previous lord spent a lot of effort to raise his spiritual root to middle grade, but he was not as good as other outstanding disciples in the sect. In addition, Xian Jingju neglected cultivation and was obsessed with wine. The disciples of Jiguang sect all laughed at him in private. 1,000 years ago, the reincarnation mirror opened. Although it was a lucky chance, the danger of death was not small. The previous lord knew that his life was coming to an end, so he made up his mind to send Xian Jingju into the reincarnation mirror. After the bloody accident of Holy Spirit, Xian Jingju disappeared for decades. Everyone thought that Xian Jingju died in it. The previous lord was so disheartened that he didn't see his son come back until he died. But one day, Xian Jingju suddenly returned in an extremely powerful manner. Not only did his cultivation reach the nature's test realm, which was beyond the reach of his peers, but his combat power was also extraordinary. It was as easy as eating and drinking to crush practitioners at the same level. Therefore, relying on the loyal supporters left by his father, Xian Jingju became the new lord without much effort. After becoming the lord, the first thing Xian Jingju did was not to eliminate his opponents in the sect, but to marry an elder of a new sect in Zhouli region as his cultivation companion. And that cultivation companion was none other than Su Yu. Wanjian sect, Su Yu. Pavilion head, Wen Tingshan. This move attracted the envy of countless small sects in Zhouli region, but no one dared to do anything under the power of the Jiguang sect. With the support of the Jiguang sect, the Wanjian sect quickly became stronger. A few years later, Xian Jingju and Su Yu's son was born. Lord, the young lord saved a young female practitioner in Baisha city and is exploring the periphery of the white stone relics with her. Hearing the report from his subordinates, Xian Jingju suddenly had a headache. He pinched his eyebrows and said in a deep voice, "Have you found out the origin of the female practitioner? This little rascal is really spoiled. There's never a day where he doesn't make people worry." Su Yu, who was flipping through the recent intelligence files, immediately raised her head and said softly, "Husband, I didn't hear it clearly just now. Can you say it again?" Xian Jingzhou's face trembled slightly, and he turned his head with a smile. "My wife, I'm just worried about An. What if he is deceived by a woman of unknown origin?" Su Yu rolled her eyes and ignored him, but her eyes clearly said, "Since you are sensible, I will let you go." Xian Jingju waved his hand to dismiss his confidants, who had been holding back hard, and smiled bitterly in his heart. It was all the sin in the reincarnation mirror that he had been trapped in for a lifetime. He sighed and tidied up the black file at hand. The 3 big words on it were particularly conspicuous. Leanly building. Chapter 488. The periphery of the white stone relics was covered with a faint mist, which covered the ruins and ancient buildings. It was so quiet that it was frightening. Suddenly, swish, swish, two white streamers fell from the sky in a straight line. After the light dissipated, Su Li and Xianan appeared. Although the danger on the periphery of the relics is low, you can't be careless. You must follow me closely, Xianan told her and looked around cautiously. His expression was not as relaxed as before. Su Li nodded slightly and followed Xianan. She narrowed her eyes and looked around. The geology of the relics was completely different from the ordinary soil outside the white stone city. It was brownish-purple like blood. From a distance, it was as black as ink, which was somewhat similar to the Blackstone forest. However, the fog in the Blackstone forest was so dark that people couldn't see their fingers. Compared with the white fog here, it was much weaker. At least at a glance, she could see many tall silhouettes through the fog. Unfortunately, Xianan didn't dare to go there. She didn't intend to expose her strength, so she could only give up for the time being. Xianan was born in an extraordinary family, and he had been practicing outside alone for many years. He slowed down his pace and took Su Li to familiarize herself with the relics. There were no surprises or dangers along the way. Although they encountered a few evil practitioners who didn't have eyes, they were solved by him quickly. A few days later, as Su Li expected, they got some waste treasures. But Xianan was still very happy, and his tense mind relaxed a lot. While he continued to explore with Su Li, he intermittently talked about the Tianjiao list of top 10,000 people. There are thousands of practitioners in the cultivation circle. There are always a small group of people who are favored by nature. They show extraordinary potential from an early age and are called the Tianjiao list of 10,000 people. The Tianjiao list of 10,000 people, as the name implies. It is the top 10,000 practitioners in a generation of Tianjiao. If they want to be on the list, they must fight for it through the Tianjiao battle. Speaking of this, Xianan's eyes showed a sense of eagerness. Speaking of it, this Tianjiao battle is about to begin. I am only in my early 500 years old. I am still young. The top 10,000 people are too far away for me, but I can still see the world. Senior fellow apprentice, is 500 years old still young? Su Li followed Xianan to clear the obstacles on the slope and pretended to be puzzled. Xianan immediately rolled his eyes. He turned his head and saw Su Li with a trace of childishness on her small face. He said angrily, 500 years is considered a long time for mortals, but for us cultivators, it is but a snap of the fingers. The age limit of the list of top 10,000 people was 2,000 years old, and it was changed every 500 years. However, the last two prodigy battles were not held successfully because of the disaster brought about by the Lady of Providence. Who knows how many people were over the age limit and lost their only chance to enter the prodigy rankings. Speaking of this, expectation appeared on Xianan's face. After 1,500 years, this Tianjiao battle will be extremely exciting. If I don't go and have a look, it will be a pity. Senior brother, even I want to go and have a look. It's a pity that I don't know if Master will bring me there after I return to the sect. She seemed to be attracted by the scene described by Xianan, and her face was full of expectation. Xianan laughed, junior sister apprentice, don't worry. The Tianjiao battle is a grand event in the entire Qingshui circle. This time I will take you to find some Mushirei spiritual jades and take them back. It can be regarded as making up for my mistakes. For the sake of the spiritual jades, you will have a place in the team that goes to the Shengxian mountain to watch the battle, Xianan said with certainty. Su Li's eyes lit up, and she clapped her hands repeatedly and said, thank you for your care, senior fellow apprentice. You are so kind. Xianan blushed again and giggled happily. When Black Lotus heard Su Li's coquettish voice, he almost vomited out the souls that he swallowed 2 days ago. But when he saw Samsara lying on the side, he swallowed the soul nourishment back in a daze. Lord, the female practitioner accompanying the young lord is very simple. Her bone age is less than 300 years old. She is not a threat to the young lord, but her origin is unknown, and it can't be found out in a short time. She may come from another big region or be a disciple of a small sect. When Xian Jingju heard the words, the wrinkles on his eyebrows disappeared slightly, but he still cared about the word's unknown origin. He immediately ordered, "Continue to investigate, but you can slow down the speed appropriately. You should hurry to recruit practitioners for the gulling gambling battle. There is not much time left." "Yes." After the confidant left, Xian Jingju rubbed his eyebrows, which were a little painful. His shoulders suddenly felt heavy, but he was not surprised. When he looked back and saw Su Yu, who was massaging his shoulders for him, the tenderness in his eyes rippled. Su Yu no longer looked like a tigress at the moment. There was a trace of worry on her beautiful face. "Master, is this trip too risky?" Xian Jingzhou's broad palm gently rested on the back of Su Yu's hand, and he shook his head firmly. "The treasures in Su Li's hands have long been clearly investigated by some people. If we don't even take back the sound acquaintance, the prestige that the Linli building has built up will plummet. What's more," Xian Jingzhou's eyes darkened, "Ling Qinglan and Chu Lu are still in their hands. This time, we must succeed no matter what." Su Yu was not an indecisive person. She knew the importance of this action. Although she was still extremely worried, she didn't show it. She just nodded and said, "Senior fellow apprentice is ready. If the gambling battle fails, he will take action personally. But in this case, the Wanjian sect will be exposed. Senior fellow apprentice can only take people to hide in the dark. It is not good for many people to be involved." Xian Jingju nodded solemnly and sighed, "I have secretly recruited experts who use poisonous insects. I hope it will not come to this step." A few days later, in an underground ruin on the periphery of the relics. With a muffled sound, Xianan climbed out of the pit with a dirty face. Seeing Su Li squatting by the pit, he sighed and spread out his palm. No one found this underground additum before. There are also spiritual jades in it, but they are not Mushure spiritual jades. They are just ordinary spiritual jades. Su Li saw a few pieces of inferior spiritual jades scattered in Xianan's palm, and her shining eyes immediately dimmed. She reluctantly smiled and said, "Senior fellow apprentice, thank you for your hard work. If you really can't find it, forget it." At the same time, she was thinking in her heart whether to leave Xianan and go to the depths of the relics alone. Seeing the disappointment in her eyes, Xianan couldn't help but feel disappointed. This was the first time that he was a senior fellow apprentice, but he couldn't help much. If his strength was stronger, he might be able to take her to the relics to have a look. Xianan, who was lazy in cultivation, had the idea of working hard to cultivate again in his mind. But he couldn't become fat in one bite. It was obviously unrealistic to improve his strength now. He suppressed his anxious mind and thought for a moment. Suddenly, his eyes lit up, and he clapped his hands and said, "I got it. Let's go to Tianyek Attic," he said excitedly, and subconsciously wanted to take Su Li's hand and take her away. Su Li's eyes flickered slightly, and she stepped aside without a trace. But she looked confused. "Tianyek Attic? Why do we go to Tianyek Attic? Although they sell information there, the relics have only been opened for a few years. If there is really information about Mushure spiritual jades for sale, they have been looted long ago." When Xianan heard this, he immediately forgot the doubt that Su Li dodged his action, and quickly explained, "That's different. We are going to the temporary station set up by Tianyek Attic in the white stone relics. If there is no news about Mushure spiritual jades in that place, we don't have to waste our efforts anymore. We can simply go to Huangxing Chamber of Commerce to buy them." "I see. Senior fellow apprentice, let's go quickly." Su Li's face showed hope, and then she wondered, what is Huangxing Chamber of Commerce? Is it related to Huangxing Hall? Yes. Xianan nodded and raised his hand. The flying sword was unsheathed with a clang in the air. He jumped on the flying sword and looked back with a smile. The strength of Huangxing Hall is not strong among the four-peak holy sects, but the group of old Taoist nuns do business reasonably. Huangxing Chamber of Commerce is the largest chamber of commerce in Qingshui Circle. As long as you can afford it, you can buy almost anything. Su Li called out the flying sword and showed a look of understanding. She immediately bowed slightly and said, "Thank you for solving my doubts, senior fellow apprentice. It doesn't matter. It's just a trifle. Let's go to the station and have a look. Xianan waved his hand, and the flying sword rushed into the sky with him. Su Li followed closely with a faint smile in her eyes. This brat was like a treasure trove. Every sentence of his could dig out a considerable amount of information. He was truly her lucky star. Tianyek Attic, the largest intelligence organization in Qingshui Circle. Originally, Su Li didn't know who set it up. But after Xianan showed off, she finally learned that it was left by a force called Tianxing Valley in ancient times. Although there were a large number of intelligence dealers cooperating with Tianyek Attic, and the organization was very loose, in fact, it was loose on the outside and tight on the inside. The real decision-makers of Tianyek Attic rarely showed up, and their background was even more unfathomable. Even if it was not listed among the four-peak holy sects, it was the most mysterious among all the cultivation forces in Qingshui Circle. Little Su Li, Tianyek Attic is not as simple as this silly boy said. In my heyday, Qingshui Circle was in a mess, but this organization was still unshakable and feared by everyone. At that time, I suspected that the real origin of Tianyek Attic could be traced back to the primitive times. Black Lotus, why didn't you tell me about Tianyek Attic before? Well, you didn't ask me, did you? Black Lotus was embarrassed. Fortunately, Su Li didn't probe further. She and Xianan stopped. What came into view was a temporarily built bustling market. People were coming and going, and the regular stone streets and houses looked extremely comfortable. Su Li looked up and saw the iconic three big words Tianyek Attic engraved on the tall stone archway at the gate of the market. And below this line of three words, there was also the word station. As Xianan said, it was a temporary station. Xianan smiled, but he secretly wiped his sweat and was anxious. He had never been here. He almost got lost after looking around the relic for a few times. Fortunately, he was lucky. I heard that the station of Tianyek Attic is very safe, and no one is allowed to fight. I hope it is true, Xianan muttered in his heart, and finally walked into the stone archway with Su Li. Chapter 489. As soon as they passed through the illusory gate in the stone archway, they heard the hustle and bustle, but it was not chaotic. Su Li glanced at it roughly, and then strolled with Xianan. There were stalls on both sides of the dirt and stone street. Most of the stalls were unknown objects obtained from the relics. If anyone was interested in buying, he would be pulled into a separate soundproof tactical matrix by the stall owner to talk about it in detail. In addition to the stalls, she also saw many bulletin boards erected on the roadside, which were shining with a little spiritual light. She could see all the information at a glance with the divine awareness. Most of the messages on these bulletin boards are soliciting helpers to explore the relics together. After Xianan glanced at dozens of bulletin boards, the hope in his eyes was slightly dim, but he still smiled on the surface. Let's look carefully, and we will always get something. When he said this, he suddenly narrowed his eyes and looked back abruptly, but he saw nothing. Is it an illusion? Xianan frowned, and he always felt that there was a faint feeling of peeping behind him. Senior fellow apprentice. Su Li called out, and he immediately returned to his senses. He smiled as if nothing had happened. Let's go and look for it again. Su Li nodded gently, and her eyes naturally drifted to the two corners behind her. There were two groups of obscure numas faintly locked on Xianan. They should not be the same force, and one of them had impressive strength. However, for her, there was not much difference in the strength of these two groups of people, so she didn't bother to pay attention to them. Less than half a day later, Xianan took Su Li to run all over the bulletin boards. There might be news of Mushue's spiritual jade, but all of them were in the depths of the relics. Seeing that Xianan put his disappointment on his face without scheming, Su Li secretly laughed in her heart, but she comforted him on the surface. Senior fellow apprentice, don't worry. I see that the news on the bulletin board is changing every day. Why don't we wait here for a few days? Maybe we will be lucky enough to meet it. That's the only way. Xianan sighed and agreed with Su Li, but he didn't have much hope in his heart. He was even thinking about which branch of the Huangxing Chamber of Commerce to go to. Taking a deep breath, Xianan's eyes became firm again. There was no turning back. Since he had promised this girl that he would help her find Mushire's spiritual jade, he would definitely not break his promise. Young sect leader is still childish. The old man who secretly protected Xian shook his head, but a smile appeared on his face. Otherwise, I will arrange a surprise for this kid. But in that case, will the master say that I spoil him too much? In the next few days, Xian took Su Li to see the bulletin board. He also held his fist and said pleasantly, "You too, please." Xian nodded with a smile and entered the fence. The middle-aged practitioner in luxurious clothes immediately greeted them. "Young masters, you have reached Jindan realm at such a young age. You must have an extraordinary background. My servants really offended you just now. It doesn't matter. In the cultivation circle, the strong are respected." "I understand." Xian waved his hand and said indifferently. The middle-aged practitioner touched the universe ring with his finger and took out 2 crystal-clear water-blue spiritual jades. "This is an apology gift. Please accept it, young heroes." Seeing this thing, Su Li's calm and obedient face suddenly froze. She stared at the spiritual jades in the hands of the middle-aged practitioner and slightly stimulated the Sueyu tactics in her body. Immediately, a subtle water spiritual power separated from the spiritual jades and integrated into her body. At this moment, Su Li immediately felt that the originally solid bottleneck of Jindan realm had a tendency to disintegrate, but it only disintegrated by 1/10,000th, and then it stopped. Mushire's spiritual jades were useful. Su Li's eyes changed, and she was thinking. Since Mushire's spiritual jades were useful, would the other Mu spiritual jades of the 5 elements also be effective? Among the Mu spiritual jades of the 5 elements, only Mushire's spiritual jades and Mushire's spiritual jades were precious. These 2 kinds of spiritual jades were the holy medicine for healing, and they were the raw materials of the life-melting pill and the life-melting pill. The other 3 kinds of spiritual jades were much more common. After this experiment, she had a preliminary estimate in her mind. If she wanted to break through the bottleneck of Jindan realm, she would need at least tens of thousands of spiritual jades. The production of Mushire's spiritual jades was not high, so it was obviously unrealistic to use it for practice. Xian didn't want to accept it, but seeing Su Li's focused and very interested look, he didn't refuse after all. After taking the spiritual jades, he cupped his fists and thanked her. Mushire's spiritual jades were not precious to him. Although there were not many Mushire spiritual jades collected by the Jiguang sect, he knew that his father's most precious treasure was much rarer than Mushire spiritual jades. Any one of them could be worth thousands of Mushire spiritual jade. However, if he really took those things out to exchange for Mushire spiritual jades, he didn't know whether he could get it or not, but he would definitely be taken back by his father and put in confinement before he could reach that step. Thinking of the confinement he had been in these years, Xian shook his head hard to get rid of the strange thoughts in his mind. Then he stuffed the spiritual jades into Su Li's hands and transmitted the sound. "Although I don't know this person, he is generous, humble and polite. I don't think he will go back on his words for that little reward. Junior sister apprentice, don't worry." Su Li held the spiritual jades that were still warm in her hand. She slightly pursed her lips and hesitated to transmit the sound. "Otherwise, I can take these 2 Mushire spiritual jades back to fool the master. I don't want you to be in danger, senior fellow apprentice." Xian was moved, but he couldn't help laughing. He said helplessly, "The mouth is short of the mouth." He said that these 2 spiritual jades are an apology gift. "You really think it is an apology gift? If we leave now, we will probably be stopped." "Really?" Su Li's eyes showed panic. "Then we don't want these spiritual jades. Let's leave quickly. Don't worry. Don't panic." Xian pressed the spiritual jades back into Su Li's palm, blinked, and said, "So many people go together. What are you afraid of? If there is really danger, we can run away." "Then, okay." Su Li nodded worriedly. She lowered her head to look at the Mushire spiritual jades in her hand, and a trace of mockery flashed in her eyes. They looked for Mushire spiritual jades for only a few days, and Mushire spiritual jades came to them obediently. How could there be such a good thing in the world? What's more, She glanced back at the few practitioners who came in after them. Although they also looked like casual practitioners, the pneuma revealed by their gestures was clearly the same as that of the middle-aged practitioner. Most of the people waiting in the fence, she had actually felt it from one of the groups of people who secretly stared at Xian, and it's interesting. Since Xian is unwilling to leave, I will see who wants to trouble him. Thinking of this, Su Li slightly raised the corner of her mouth and pretended to walk with Xian unconsciously. Xian obviously couldn't notice this. He just took Su Li to sit down in a place and waited patiently. When it was getting late, the number of people in the fence had reached 80. Su Li was surprised to find that the second group of people who secretly followed Xian also sneaked in. The two groups of people mixed together, and no one recognized the real purpose of the other. The atmosphere was strange and harmonious. The middle-aged practitioner in luxurious clothes also frowned at the moment. The person he sent clearly only deliberately issued a commission in front of Xian in order to lead him to come here alone. Originally, it was an accident that Su Li had never seen before, but he didn't expect that when he gathered his own people, more than 30 casual practitioners came in one after another. Judging from Xian's reaction, they were not people of the Jiguang sect. Your Honor, there are more than 30 miscellaneous people. How should we deal with them? Some people under his command showed hesitation. The middle-aged practitioner who was originally smiling narrowed his eyes when he heard the words, and his smile became a little more casual. They are just some repulsive casual practitioners in Jindan realm. Since they broke into the hell, we can kill them together. After we kill the boy of the Xian family, we will take the benefits and leave. We don't have to stay in the Zhouli region anymore. Many people dressed as guards were shocked and bowed their heads in response. The skinny elder who had been resting on the side also opened his eyes and nodded gently. The middle-aged practitioner smiled more when he saw this. He didn't care about the guards. As long as the skinny elder agreed, it would be foolproof. Even if the rest of the people died, it didn't matter. Chapter 490. Master, it's almost time. Behind the fence, a guard beside the middle-aged cultivator whispered in a low voice. The middle-aged cultivator turned the jade ring on his thumb, walked to the center of the field, and said with a bright smile, "Everyone, it's almost time. Let's go." As soon as he finished speaking, all the practitioners who were resting stood up. One person beside the middle-aged practitioner immediately led the way. They passed through the range of the tactical matrix, and the other 80 people immediately followed. On the way, the middle-aged practitioner talked about some precautions in the burial ground of poisonous insects. You must be familiar with the burial ground of poisonous insects, but for the sake of everyone, I still have to explain. There are opportunities everywhere in the burial ground of poisonous insects. Don't let go of any poisonous insect stone. Maybe there is a precious poisonous insect in the state of tortoise. Moreover, you can kill poisonous insect demons, but you can't destroy the demonic mother. Otherwise, no one can save you. Xian nodded repeatedly. His father once said that the white stone relics was built on a huge burial ground of poisonous insects. It was normal for there to be a small burial ground of poisonous insects in the periphery. Relying on this, he became even more confident in the operation this time. Su Li only knew a little about it. After secretly asking Xian, a touch of understanding flashed through her eyes. This white stone relics turned out to be a burial ground of poisonous insects for cultivation. In the ancient cultivation era, poisonous insect practitioners existed. Although they were rare, each poisonous insect practitioner's means were unpredictable. They did things that ordinary people couldn't do, and the poisonous insects in their hands also had their own functions. In the reincarnation mirror, the sound acquaintance, poisonous insect tracking for miles, and poisonous soul eating she encountered were all very rare poisonous insects in the poisonous insect cultivation system. Ordinary poisonous insects simply superimposed the cultivation of poisonous insect practitioners, and their functions were very limited. Su Li still remembered that in the reincarnation mirror, she used sound acquaintance for the first time. She diverted the trouble to Yong Wei and solved a big problem for herself. Sound acquaintance was refracted in Qingshui Circle, and it still had the same effect. Even if a practitioner in Juji realm used it, it would be difficult for a practitioner in Huashan realm to distinguish whether it was real or fake. If she got it again, it would play a greater role. Thinking of this, Su Li's eyes flashed, and she glanced around. The poisonous insect cultivation was good, but the premise was that this action was real. An hour later, the group of more than 80 people had reached the critical point between the outer and inner ring of the ruins. If they advanced a few more miles, the danger would increase by several times. Xianan looked at the desolate and lonely ruins around him. Except for their team, there was no one else. Is this really the Gu burial ground? He couldn't help but ask. The middle-aged cultivator smiled. Young hero, don't worry. If the Gu graveyard was so easy to find, it would have been dug out 2 years ago. We wouldn't have had a chance. When Xianan heard the words, he felt it was reasonable, and temporarily put down the doubts in his heart. But he was easy to deceive. Among the other 30 people, an old man in a grey robe noticed that something was wrong. His face suddenly changed, and he shouted, "Young lord, be careful. There's a killing array underground." As soon as the words came out, Xianan's pupils shrank instantly. Without saying a word, he pulled Su Li back and wanted to get away from the middle-aged practitioner. Damn it, it's the bastards of the Jiguang sect. The middle-aged cultivator's expression turned ugly. He waved his hand and shouted, "Attack." As soon as he gave the order, the practitioners dressed as guards, who had faintly formed a circle around Xianan, approached in an instant. Xianan's expression was cold. He waved one hand, and dozens of spiritual jades exploded, turning into barriers to protect the surroundings. Colorful spiritual power poured on them, and blasted in the silent mountain. At the same time, the rest of the middle-aged cultivator's subordinates had also fought with the practitioners of the Jiguang sect. In a few seconds, there were casualties. Young lord. The old man in a grey robe's face changed wildly. His white sleeve swelled in the wind and turned into a huge knife. When he slashed down, the terrifying wave that poured into the blade cut a dozen guards in front of him into dozens of pieces in the blink of an eye. Nature's test realm. When the middle-aged cultivator saw this scene, his face changed slightly. His eyes were gloomy, but he didn't panic. He said respectfully, "Elder Ghost, things have changed. Please help." The skinny old man, who was less than 6 feet tall, who had been beside him, narrowed his eyes into a line. Suddenly, he opened his eyes a little, and his figure disappeared in a flash. The old man in a grey robe was so anxious that he quickly approached Xianan suddenly. A white claw shadow attacked him without warning, and the target was his heart. The old man in a grey robe snorted coldly. His left sleeve moved and turned into a silver round shield, blocking in front of the claw shadow. Ding, 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 ding. The crisp sound of the 5 fingers colliding mixed into a sound. 5 black spots appeared on the silver round shield, and the entire shield was dyed black in the blink of an eye. The old man in a grey robe was moved. No matter how crazily he attacked, the Wanxiang old demon's incorporeal technique blocked all of his attacks, not affecting the middle-aged cultivator at all. At this critical moment, Xianan, who fell into despair, suddenly saw a white palm grab the middle-aged practitioner's wrist. Everything came to an abrupt end. He turned his eyes in amazement and tried to look at the junior sister apprentice beside him, but his eyes were blurred. Su Li's smiling face appeared in his eyes, which was fascinating. Her red lips opened slightly, and her eyes turned. "Xianan, what's your father's name?" He shifted his eyes, revealing a pleading expression. In the next instant, 10,000 swords pierced through his heart. Pu. Puff. 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 Fut. Countless small swords pierced through, erasing his figure in the blink of an eye, leaving only a faint blood mist floating in the air. Qiuzhen looked at the dead Wanxiang old demon in front of him and felt his body stiffen. He did not dare to move. When Su Li said those words just now, he was concentrating on fighting against the Wanxiang old demon, so he did not hear it. When did such a horrible evil figure come to Jiuli region? Qiuzhen took a light breath and barely stabilized his mind. He turned his head and saw corpses everywhere. The people of Ghost Region were all killed by the mysterious girl when he was in a daze. No, there is one left. He thought of the middle-aged practitioner who escaped by exploding his blood. Suddenly, a bloody flowing light flashed in the sky. Bang! The blood mist dissipated, and the figure was revealed. The middle-aged practitioner looked at Su Li with astonishment. His eyes were full of despair and despair. How can I come back? Before he finished his words, Su Li smiled slightly and slapped him into a blood mist. It was impossible for a man in the half-step of Huishan realm to escape in front of her by such an inferior means as exploding his blood. She just let him enjoy the despair after a moment of hope, and let the nightmare cast a spell on the middle-aged practitioner. Senior fellow apprentice, come back. Su Li picked up the cracked sword rune on the ground and shook it in front of Xianan. When Xianan heard the word senior fellow apprentice, he suddenly shivered, and his dazed pupils slowly became lively. He looked at Su Li, who was still smiling in front of him, and then turned his head to see the blood all over the ground, as well as Qiu Zhan and others who were also stunned. He still couldn't believe what he saw. It was like a dream. Was the person in front of him really the little junior sister apprentice who had been with him for several days? Don't call me senior fellow apprentice, Xianan swallowed, and a trace of fear flashed in his eyes. Although Su Jojo just took action to save him, her cruel means were really chilling. Su Li sighed when she saw this. She turned around desolately and said, I didn't mean to hide it. Since you are afraid, I will leave now. Xianan's heart trembled when he heard this. Yes, Su Jojo committed so many murders for him, wasn't it? What was he afraid of? Xianan, were you still a man? Don't go. I'm not afraid. He looked anxious and stepped forward to stop in front of Su Li. But he saw Su Li smiling gently and didn't look sad at all. Xianan couldn't help but smile bitterly. Although he was fooled, he felt much better after this. He immediately scratched his head and said embarrassedly, You are better than me. I can't be called senior fellow apprentice. Last time, you clearly used the sword commanding skill. While Xianan was amazed, he saw Su Li's hands moved quickly. She pulled out the most essential tender meat of the centipede and put it into the universe ring. Senior sister apprentice, what are you doing? Su Li didn't answer. She tilted her head and looked at the east. Without saying a word, she carried Xianan and disappeared. Not long after, a group of practitioners with extraordinary pneumas came. When they saw the huge centipede poisonous insect demon, which was bigger than a mountain, they were shocked. The inner periphery of the relic was covered with white mist. The night was as cool as water. Beside the clear and quiet lake, a small isolation tactical matrix was formed by Su Li's fingers, which made Xianan's eyes full of admiration. Senior sister apprentice, do you also know tactical matrix? Su Li smiled and still didn't answer. She put spiritual firewood in the tactical matrix to make a fire, and then skewered the centipede meat on the bright flying sword and put it on the fire. After finishing this step, she waved her sleeve robe, and many bottles and jars appeared around her. The fragrance was overwhelming. Xianan's eyes widened. Was she going to barbecue? Senior sister apprentice actually used spiritual firewood of ordinary practitioners to refine elixirs to cook. This was really too fragrant. The spiritual firewood crackled. Xianan sat cross-legged beside the campfire and looked at Su Li attentively. Her hands were like flowing water, sprinkling layers of spices on the centipede meat. The fresh and tender meat glistened with oil and made a sizzling sound, and there were bursts of spiritual energy surging. How delicious was this? Xianan couldn't help swallowing his saliva. He stared at the meat skewers and was unwilling to look away. Su Li looked at it and laughed. She handed over the meat skewers that had been made in her hand. This poisonous insect demon has 2,000 years of cultivation. You eat less to avoid nosebleeds. Ah! Is there a cultivation limit for eating meat skewers? Xianan heard such a remark for the first time. He couldn't help but feel bitter, but his hands moved extremely quickly. He took the meat skewers and took a bite. Crack! It was crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. In the next moment, the extremely delicious taste exploded in his mouth, turning into waves that impacted the taste buds. Xianan stared at the skewer in his hand in a daze. After a long time, he wiped his eyes, and his eyes were wet. It was delicious, and he cried, "It's not delicious when it's cold." Su Li reminded him faintly. Xianan immediately came to his senses and ate up the meat skewers quickly. He even wanted to swallow his tongue. Only after one skewer, the hot spiritual power poured into his limbs and bones. Xianan only felt warm all over as if he was in a stove. His face instantly turned red, and soon he began to have nosebleeds. Su Li shook her head and laughed. Fortunately, she sprinkled some neutralizing powder. Otherwise, a centipede poisonous insect demon in nature's test, even if there was only a piece of meat, could not be borne by people in Jindan realm. Xianan covered his nose with one hand and wiped his tears with the other. Senior sister apprentice, it's so delicious, woo-woo. Chapter 492. This meat is full of nimbus, which is suitable for you to practice. Su Li reminded him, and Xianan immediately sat up straight. He ran the mental method for a moment and entered the state of meditation. Su Li saw that his breath was stable and there was no danger, so she ignored him. She took out more than 20 poisonous insect stones from the black lotus ring and cracked them one by one. The centipede poisonous insect demon was quite powerful, and the poisonous insect stone it guarded was not an ordinary one. Crack, perhaps it was a long time ago, Su Li easily cracked the first poisonous insect stone without much effort. It was scorched black and lifeless inside. Even she couldn't recognize what kind of poisonous insect it was. After all, the poisonous cultivation insects in Qingshui Circle are somewhat different from those in the reincarnation mirror. They are not only of distinct grades, but also have various functions. I can't distinguish the types of poisonous insects just by looking at the surface of the poisonous insect stone. I don't know if what I learned in the reincarnation mirror can be used to refine and drive poisonous insects. Many thoughts flashed through Su Li's mind, and the second poisonous insect stone in her hand was broken. This time, what she saw was no longer the scorched gravel, but a weak cyan turtle. The turtle shell was triangular, like a pocket-sized mountain. It turns out to be the poisonous power insect, but I don't know which grade it is. The poisonous cultivation insects were divided into 7 grades according to grades. The first grade was the lowest, and the 7th grade was the highest, corresponding to the 7 realms of cultivation. Su Li recognized this poisonous insect, and her eyes lit up slightly. Although the poisonous power insect was not as good as the poisonous body insect among the poisonous cultivation insects, it was also a relatively rare poisonous insect. The poisonous power insect fed on demon beasts. Su Li happened to collect a lot of meat of the centipede poisonous insect demon. She took out a few pieces and threw them over. The originally slow cyan turtle immediately crawled quickly and bit the meat in its mouth, trying to swallow it. Seeing this, Su Li put it aside and smashed the remaining poisonous insect stones together. She got 3 identical cyan turtles. They looked like they were about to starve to death, and her grade couldn't be seen. Su Li threw a large piece of raw meat for the 4 little turtles to eat, and then absorbed the Mushire spiritual jade on the side. Although there was not much demon meat in the universe ring, it was the most essential part of the poisonous insect demon's body. It was enough to feed these poisonous insects for a long time. It was a silent night. In the morning of the next day, Xianan woke up from meditation. He looked inside his body and suddenly found that the originally strong Jindan had a few cracks. He might be able to break the Jindan and reach Yuanying realm after a few days of hard work. Such powerful demon meat. Xianan was speechless secretly. There was no shortage of poisonous insect demon meat in Jiuli region, but he had never heard that it could be used to make spiritual soup to assist cultivation. This was probably Su Jojo's unique secret skill. Thinking that Su Jojo even displayed such a precious secret skill in front of him without concealment, Xianan Xin couldn't help but feel moved. He opened his eyes and looked around. He was stunned by what he saw. Why were there 4 more turtles by the bonfire? Where did senior sister go? You're awake. Su Li's voice suddenly came from behind. Xian'an was so scared that he shivered. When he turned around, he saw Su Li coming over with a few lively strange fish. You can't be too hasty in your cultivation. You ate the meat of the Gu demon yesterday, so you can't eat it again today. Otherwise, you won't be able to absorb it and your foundation will be damaged. After that, Su Li put the processed fish on the shelf and continued, these fish are poisonous. You will feel a little pain after eating them, but it can erase the influence of the poisonous insect demon's meat in your body. Eat them all when they are cooked. Xian'an nodded repeatedly. He glanced at the strange fish with sharp teeth in its mouth and swallowed in horror. Could poisonous fish in Jindan realm really be eaten? Although he trembled in his heart, he still trusted Su Li unconditionally and wondered how to eat them later. At this moment, buzz, 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 buzz. Several halos lit up on the surface of the 4 cyan turtles motionless by the bonfire one after another. Among them, the smallest one lit up the most halos. There were 4 halos, and the others all had 3 halos. Rank 4 poisonous insect. Xian'an's eyes widened and he exclaimed, Senior Sister Apprentice, are these? Su Li answered softly and held up the only rank 4 poisonous insect. The little cyan turtle awkwardly rubbed against Su Li's fingertips. There was a smile on her usually indifferent face. The poisonous insect method learned in the reincarnation mirror was useful. Otherwise, these poisonous insects could not be awakened at all. They would have died when she broke the poisonous insect stone. Senior Sister Apprentice even knows poisonous insect method, Xian'an muttered to himself and was completely absent-minded. In Zholi region, there were many people who knew poisonous insect cultivation, but very few people really knew poisonous insect method. Even in their Jiguang sect, only a very old Grand Elder knew a little about it. As for himself, his understanding of poisonous insect only stopped at recognizing the poisonous insect ring. He didn't even know what poisonous insect was in Su Li's hand. Xian'an was stunned, but he saw Su Li's hand move again. She picked up the other 3 rank 3 poisonous insects and softly chanted an obscure incantation. Then Xian'an saw the rank 4 poisonous insect suddenly opened its mouth and swallowed the 3 rank 3 poisonous insects in one gulp. Not even a drop of blood splashed out. At the same time, the rank 4 poisonous insect exuded a mysterious pneuma. A new layer of halo shadow faintly appeared outside the halo on the surface of its body. What is this? Is the rank 4 poisonous insect going to advance? Xian'an looked at it with a confused face. He could not understand what Su Li was doing. The poisonous insect's digestive ability was very strong. After a while, the pneuma of advancement disappeared. At the same time, the shadow on the surface of its body was also fixed and did not solidify. The limit of rank 4. Su Li frowned slightly for a moment, and then she was relieved. She learned the method of poisonous insect fusion from the first life of reincarnation mirror. 3 poisonous insects of the same rank could be integrated into a higher poisonous insect. The 4 poisonous insects in front of her were obviously of insufficient rank. She had made up for it with her method, which was the limit. What else could she be dissatisfied with? Thinking of this, Su Li smiled and pinched the poisonous insect in her hand. When she slightly stimulated it, she suddenly felt that her strength had improved a little, but it was not obvious. After my physical body awakened the evil ghost in Gui region, I was tempered by a lot of thunder. Most of it has broken the limit, and it is not inferior to the nature's test. The rank 4 poisonous insect is still too low for me. Su Li sighed secretly, undid the mark, and threw the poisonous power insect to Xian'an's senior sister apprentice. This, Xian'an was immediately flattered. He held the little turtle in both hands and didn't know what to say for a while. He couldn't understand why Su Jojo was so considerate to him when he and Su Jojo met by chance. From the day she killed Gui region, he could see that this woman was by no means as kind as she looked on the surface. On the contrary, she was more like a ruthless female practitioner of the evil cult. However, she was extremely gentle to him. He was not a heartless person. Such gentleness made him feel a deep pressure, which made him inexplicably frightened. Take it. Su Li had lived 2 lives. How could she not know what Xian'an was thinking? She said indifferently, This thing is useless for me. Although you can barely use it, it is also a life-saving weapon if you use it well. I broke your sword rune, so I will compensate you with another one. However, compared with the sword rune, this thing is probably of a much lower grade. Her eyes were gentle, and she looked at Xian'an as if she was looking at Su Yu's stillborn son in the reincarnation mirror. She still didn't want to see the truth and falsehood in the reincarnation mirror. Some things had become her obsession. She could meet the son of Xian Jingju again in this life. Even if he was an enemy, she would make up for what she owed in the previous life. Although such behavior was selfish, she was selfish. Thinking of this, Su Li smiled more, but Xian'an inexplicably felt a trace of bitterness, so that he couldn't bear to refuse Su Li again. He just took it and said cautiously and stupidly, "Senior sister apprentice, you are so kind to me, as good as my mother." "Your mother is very good to you?" Su Li asked casually. Xian'an nodded naturally and said, "Yes. My mother is very fierce to my father, but she is very kind to me. Otherwise, I would have been caught by my father and put in confinement because of my slacking practice." Su Yu's face flashed in Su Li's mind involuntarily, and she chuckled. It turns out that the Lord of Jiguang sect is a henpecked person. "That's right." Xian'an raised his head. "If my mother said to go west, my father would never dare to go east. At that time, my mother was a famous cold beauty in Jiuli region. My father tried his best to get her, so he naturally cherished her very much." Su Li nodded and didn't want to say more. She put out the bonfire, took the poisonous fish roasted on the bonfire, and handed it to Xian'an. Xian'an's face suddenly became bitter. 2 hours later, Xian'an's eyes were dull, and he lay on the ground like a dead dog, motionless. He was sweating all over and was full of a strong stench. How could this be a little pain? It was clearly a hell that was more terrible than confinement. "Senior sister apprentice, you are too cruel. Even my father has not treated me like this." He reluctantly got up and sat up, looking at Su Li, who was absorbing Mushure spiritual jade, with a bitter face. Then, Su Li opened her eyes and waved her sleeves. "Ah!" Xian'an shouted, and then he turned into a flying man and was thrown into the lake. The stench spread, and in an instant, many fish emerged from the water with their bellies up. "Take a good bath. Your body is mixed with highly toxic, and it will take an hour to integrate into your body. If you don't take a good bath, don't blame others if you are poisoned to death later." Xian'an finally swam out of the water. When he heard Su Li's words from a distance, his heart trembled fiercely. He didn't care that there were monsters in the lake, and immediately flapped his feet to take a bath. Su Li removed the tactical matrix, stood by the lake with her hands behind her back, and looked at Xian'an calmly. He was protected too well by Xian Jingju, and he had hardly suffered. If this went on, although his talent was good, it would be difficult for him to make great achievements. If the Jiguang sect was destroyed, he would not escape death. In this case, she would be a villain and train him well. An hour later, Xian'an climbed ashore with a bitter face. He put on his clothes and sat aside angrily, but he was extremely grateful to Su Li in his heart. At this moment, what was lying in his pubic region was no longer Jindan realm, but a baby carved from jade. He knew very well that if he only relied on his own practice, it would take at least 200 years to break through Yuanying realm. But with the help of his senior sister apprentice, the 200 years were shortened to a few days, and his foundation was solid, without any worries. Seeing that his childish temper was reversed, Su Li couldn't help laughing. She said helplessly, "Come here, I will teach you how to use the poisonous power insect." Chapter 493. The poisonous insect method was broad and profound. If Xian'an learned it all, it would take too long, and it would delay his practice. Therefore, Su Li only taught him the control method. After several failures, Xian'an initially controlled the poisonous power insect in just half a day. Feeling the surging power in his body, he had a lot of fun. After that, Su Li took Xian'an on the road again and killed several poisonous insects to feed the poisonous power insect. Several of them were killed by Xian'an with the poisonous power insect. In terms of poisonous insect stones, there were a lot of gains, but there was no poisonous cultivation insect comparable to the poisonous power insect. Besides, it was troublesome to feed them, so Su Li discarded them casually. In the blink of an eye, more than a month passed. Su Li visited all the suspicious places in the white stone relics and gained a lot. She got nearly 3,000 Mushure spiritual jades, but this was also the limit. As for the center of the white stone relics, Su Li tried to get close, but she gave up after sensing a breath that made her afraid. In this life, she was not going to take the road of poisonous insect practice. There was no need to add trouble. Senior Sister Apprentice, are you leaving? In front of the white stone city gate, Xianan looked at Su Li reluctantly. Behind him, Qiu Zhan and others watched from a distance and did not dare to approach. Su Li smiled calmly. All good things must come to an end. You should go back and have a look after coming out for a long time. If I have the chance, I will visit the Jiguang sect in person. At that time, don't let me down with your cultivation. I will work hard to practice. Xianan's voice was firm, but his heart was full of bitterness. How could he not understand that Su Li's words were perfunctory? Who could say when he could see her in the future? He rolled his eyes and suddenly said, Senior Sister, can you give me a summoning talisman? I won't harass you on normal days. If I encounter a danger that even my parents can't solve, at least I have. Su Li bent her eyes and looked at Xianan with a faint smile. Until the latter blushed, she took out a carrier rune and put it in Xianan's palm. She chuckled and said, this carrier rune can only be used 3 times. Ah! 3 times. Xianan's little face became bitter. He saw the beautiful figure in front of him suddenly drifting away like clouds, and only the voice echoed in his ears. We will meet again if we are destined. Xianan grabbed forward but failed. He was lost and muttered to himself, Senior Sister Apprentice, Young Master, it's time to go back. Qiuzhen came up and said in a low voice. He was deeply moved. It had only been a month, but the young master had already reached the nascent soul stage under the guidance of that mysterious female cultivator. After a quarter of an hour, Xianan put away the reluctance on his face and returned to his former cynical appearance, but there was a little more firmness in his eyes. Then let's go back. I want to cultivate as fast as I can. When Qiuzhen heard this, he immediately felt very comforted. If the sect master heard this from young master, he would definitely be very happy. Who could have thought that the young lord's dislike of practicing was cured by such a coincidence? Although he knew in his heart that Xianan practiced in order to catch up with the female practitioner of the evil circle, as long as his strength became stronger, everything was fine. Shua. The advanced spiritual boat engraved with the mark of the Jiguang sect flew into the void and gradually disappeared into the sky. A light suddenly flashed in front of the empty Baisha city gate, and Su Li's figure reappeared. She looked up at the sky lightly, and then her body flew away like an arrow leaving the bow. Tianyi City. Zholi region was the most prosperous cultivation city under the control of the holy sect Tianyin tribe. The largest Huangxing Chamber of Commerce in Zholi region had also taken root here for thousands of years. The cultivation trade was extremely popular. On this day, in front of the gate of Tianyi City, which was hundreds of meters high, there was a regular queue as usual. From time to time, there were some practitioners who had just come out to see the world. Looking at the tall city tower, their faces were full of amazement. On a bulletin board on the side of the city gate, a few golden characters were constantly flashing. Those below Jindan realm are not allowed to enter the city. In the front of the queue, a female practitioner in white with an ordinary face was mixed in, inconspicuous. This woman was Su Li. If she wanted spiritual jades other than Mushure spiritual jade, the channel of the Huangxing Chamber of Commerce was useful to her. The Huangxing Chamber of Commerce in Tianyi City was the best choice. She retracted her gaze from the bulletin board and sighed slightly in her heart. The practitioners who could be regarded as the mainstay in Zholi region only reached the standard of entering the city when they came to Tianyi City. At this moment, there was a sudden commotion behind the queue. Su Li looked back and saw a huge golden jade chariot falling from the sky. The white gauze fluttered in the wind, and the flames were flowing under the wheels. It was like a fairy chariot descending to the world. The immortal sons and goddesses of the Tiani tribe have returned to the city. Oh my God! I can see the talents of Jolie region with my own eyes in my lifetime. This old man's trip was not in vain. I'm so lucky. Today, I'm blessed by the immortal sons. I will immediately go back to practice in isolation to break through. Everyone was talking about it. Su Li also pretended to be excited and drowned in the crowd of practitioners. But her eyes were sober and clear. She looked coldly at the huge jade chariot floating into the city from the sky, and frowned imperceptibly. There were more than a dozen Numas in the jade chariot, and all of them had extraordinary cultivation. None of them was lower than Yuanying realm, and 2 of them had even reached Huashan realm. Huashan realm was nothing to her, so she didn't care much about it. What she really cared about were the Numas of the 2 Huashan realm, which actually reminded her of 2 old friends. Tianyin tribe, hey, I'm talking to you. Why are you in a daze? Do you still want to enter the city? The grumpy voice of the guard came into her ears. Su Li came to her sense and smiled apologetically. The guard was slightly stunned. This female practitioner didn't look good, but why was she so beautiful when she smiled? When he was in a daze, Su Li had taken the rune to enter the city from his hand and disappeared in the big tactical matrix for protecting the city, which made him feel sorry. After Su Li entered the city, she heard the noise. In her eyes, Tiani City was almost the same as other cultivation cities. The only difference was that the roads and houses were wider and more magnificent, and the practitioners' cultivation was higher. For example, the street was as flat as a mirror, which could accommodate dozens of practitioners walking side by side. From time to time, she could see the strong practitioners sitting on the back of the demon beasts passing by. There were no practitioners setting up stalls on both sides of the street, but only beautifully decorated pavilions and shops. Su Li grabbed a casual practitioner and asked for the way. Then she knew the specific location of the Huangxing Chamber of Commerce. She immediately went into the vast crowd. Not long after, a 9-story pavilion located at the corner of the central street came into her sight. The words Huangxing Chamber of Commerce were outlined with purple gold, which was gorgeous and undecayed for thousands of years. The Huangxing Chamber of Commerce is so rich. Little Su Li, don't you consider going to the Huangxing Hall? After that, you will have everything. Looking at the gate of the Huangxing Chamber of Commerce, Black Lotus's eyes were shining. His old habit suddenly occurred, and he desperately urged Su Li to be a gentleman on the beam. Su Li casually plated a layer of isolation tactical matrix on the surface of the Black Lotus ring, and stepped into the gate of the pavilion. A cold and fragrant breath came to her face. At the same time, one of the handsome male practitioners in cyan clothes standing on the side of the door came out and stopped in front of Su Li. A gentle and polite smile appeared on his face. What do you want to buy? I'm Qing She, and I can lead the way for you. Su Li tilted her head and glanced at the female practitioners in pink clothes on the other side of the door. There was no fluctuation in her eyes. She just nodded and said, "Take me to see the Mu spiritual jades of the 5 elements, except for the Mu Shirei spiritual jades." Qing She's eyes suddenly brightened when he heard the words. He made a gesture and said, "This way, please." Although the rest of the Mu spiritual jades of the 4 elements were not as precious as the Mu Shirei spiritual jades, they were still valuable. If he could make this business, he would not have to worry about the practice resources this month. Thinking of this, he pretended to turn around inadvertently and quietly glanced at Su Li, who looked younger than him. He felt a burst of envy in his heart. Different people had different lives. Some people were born with a golden spoon, and they didn't need to worry about the practice resources at all. People like them, who were born in poverty, had to rely on themselves to fight for the cultivation resources. Only by doing their best in the Chamber of Commerce could they get meager rewards and push forward their own cultivation. Their future was worrying. "Have we arrived?" Su Li suddenly asked. Qing She was shocked and said immediately, "Almost there. It's in the branch ahead." He didn't dare to have any more thoughts or show any emotions. Compared with those desperate casual practitioners who put their lives on the line, his life was good enough. At least he was born with a good appearance and could work in the safest Huangxing Chamber of Commerce in the world. Su Li naturally didn't know the thoughts of such a small figure as Qing Shi. She turned and stepped into the branch, and immediately saw rows of transparent counters made of spiritual crystals. There were rows of rare spiritual stones and spiritual jades on the counters. The varieties were quite complete. There were several pawns with the same status as Qing Shi beside the counter. They humbly introduced in a low voice in front of the practitioners who were either dressed in extraordinary clothes or looked cold and arrogant. Su Li walked to the counter and glanced at it. She immediately nodded with satisfaction. She pointed to one of the fiery red spiritual jades and said, "Very good. Show me the Muhua spiritual jade." As soon as she said that, Qing Shi's face suddenly showed embarrassment. "Dear customer, our Huangxing Chamber of Commerce has a clear order." Before he finished his words, he was suddenly interrupted by a tender laugh. "Ha ha ha, where does this bumpkin come from? She doesn't even know the rules of Huangxing Chamber of Commerce. How dare she come to the Tianzi side hall? Yu Tian, the threshold of your Huangxing Chamber of Commerce is too low, isn't it?" This voice was not loud, but everyone present had cultivation and had sharp ears and eyes. They all heard it clearly and looked over at the same time. At this glance, many people's expressions changed slightly, and they secretly felt pity for Su Li. How could this playboy come here? In front of the counter not far in front of Su Li, a graceful and delicate female practitioner leaned on the chest of a pale young man like a little bird. Her eyes were full of charm. At the same time, the female practitioner straightened up from the young man's arms. Her eyes were like silk, which made the male practitioners around her feel hot, and the female practitioner frowned. That woman was Yin Jiaojiao, the famous slut of the Tianyin tribe. Su Li glanced at the two of them, and then turned her eyes back to the Muhua spiritual jade. She said, "What is the clear order of your Huangxing Chamber of Commerce?" Qing Shi's face was pale, and his lips were trembling. He transmitted the sound in secret anxiously, "Go away. Yin Mingyu is the only son of the first elder of our Jiuli region branch of the Chamber of Commerce. You can't offend him." "You have such an ugly face and you still dare to come out and make a fool of yourself. Hurry up and get lost." As soon as she finished speaking, Su Li walked towards Yin Jiaojiao. Yin Jiaojiao's face suddenly changed, and she pulled up Yin Yutian's sleeves. Qing Shi also followed her closely. It seemed that he wanted to say something but didn't dare to persuade her. Su Li didn't stop and soon came to Yin Yutian. She waved her hand without saying a word. Yin Yutian, who had been calm, suddenly changed his expression. He was about to stop her, but he seemed to be invisible in front of Su Li. Even if he stood in front of Yin Jiaojiao, Su Li's hand still fell on Yin Jiaojiao's face. Pa! The crisp sound reverberated in the hall, and everyone was stunned. This female cultivator dared to hit Yin Jiaojiao in front of Yin Yutian? She was really tired of living. Yin Jiaojiao's face swelled up at a speed visible to the naked eye. She covered her cheek and was stunned for a moment. Then she immediately grabbed Su Li's face crazily. "Wicked girl, I want you to die." Su Li's eyes flashed with ridicule. She grabbed Yin Jiaojiao's arm with one hand and exerted a little force. Crack, the arm was broken. Vulnerable. Su Li chuckled, but it sounded like a devil's ravings to everyone. Where did this hothead come from? How dare she fight in Huangxing Chamber of Commerce? Your Excellency, you have gone too far. Yin Yutian shouted coldly. He failed to stop Su Li again and again, and his face finally became gloomy. Su Li's action was not only a slap in his face, but also a slap in the face of Huangxing Chamber of Commerce. If Su Li escaped today, he would become a big joke in Huangxing Hall, and even his father would be implicated. Su Li turned around and returned to her original place. She put her palms back in her sleeves and stared at Yin Yutian with great interest for a moment. Suddenly her lips buzzed, and a sound was transmitted into Yin Yutian's ears. You want to use Yin Jiaojiao's charming skill to achieve great success. You are not as unbearable as the rumor says. Su Li's first sentence made Yin Yutian's expression change greatly, and the second sentence made him tremble slightly. But Yin Jiaojiao's charming skill is not as simple as you think. You have been cheated by her for several months, but you didn't notice it at all. If you fool around with her for half a month, your foundation will almost be destroyed. Now you even stand up for her. It's ridiculous. Yin Yutian clenched his fists and responded secretly, "Is this true? Yes or no, don't you have a try?" Su Li's tone was impatient. She turned around and called Qing Shi. She took out the celestial stones and said, "Give me Mujin spiritual jade, Mu spiritual jade, and Mewtwo spiritual jade." Qing Shi glanced at Yin Yutian, whose expression kept changing, and didn't mean to stop her. He immediately nodded, took the celestial stones, and walked to the counter to operate. A fierce conflict suddenly disappeared, and there was only a little silence in the field. Seeing that there was nothing to see, the practitioners left one after another. Before leaving, they didn't forget to look at Su Li's face. Although they didn't know the content of Su Li's last sound transmission to Yin Yutian, it didn't prevent them from imagining it. This woman was not someone they could provoke. Yutian. Yin Jiaojiao covered her face and looked at Yin Yutian in astonishment. She couldn't help but cry out. Yin Yutian's words were soft and pleasant in ordinary days. But when he sensed that his foundation was depleted to only 30%, it instantly became a deadly sound. Yin Yutian's face was distorted. He thought of what he did with Yin Jiaojiao in ordinary days. He thought that this woman had completely changed her mind after following him. He even chose a low-level practice method in order not to hurt Yin Jiaojiao. But he didn't expect that the person next to him wanted his life every day. "Yin Jiaojiao, you are really good." Yin Yutian took a deep breath. He was so angry that he laughed. His eyes were full of killing intent. When Yin Jiaojiao saw Yin Yutian's change of attitude, her heart skipped a beat. The grievance on her face immediately turned into panic. "No, Yutian, I didn't mean to hurt you. Listen to my explanation." Slap. Yin Yutian slapped Yin Jiaojiao fiercely with a ferocious look. "Get out. Get out. Otherwise, even if you have the support of the Tianyin tribe, I will kill you." Yin Jiaojiao finally felt Yin Yutian's determination. She didn't care that her face was beaten into a pig's head. She quickly got up and fled in panic. Seeing that Yin Jiaojiao was so straightforward, the last hope in Yin Yutian's heart was completely eliminated. He was full of bitterness. Even if he almost lost his foundation, he was still soft-hearted after all. He closed his eyes in pain. After a long time, he slowly opened his eyes, and calmness was restored in his eyes. There was no one in the Tianzi side hall. Yin Yutian pondered for a moment and called Qing Shi. "Where is the female senior?" The female practitioner could see through his background at a glance. She couldn't be as young as she looked. Yin Yutian guessed that she was probably a hidden senior. Qing Shi was surprised to hear the name. Senior. Although cultivators could maintain their youth forever, there was still a difference between an aged face and a truly young face. He had received many people, so he could naturally see that the female guest was truly young. At most, she was no more than 500 years old. However, since the young lord said so, he didn't dare to refute. He immediately replied respectfully. After the senior bought 4,000 Mu 4-element spiritual jades, she left slowly 4,000 Mu 4-element spiritual jades. Yin Yutian was stunned, and he almost thought that he had heard it wrong. Mu 4-element spiritual jades had no great use except for refining elixirs. Besides, the elixirs refined by Mu spiritual jades were useful. Other spiritual jades could not be sold at all. Yes. Qing Shi lowered his head and carefully added, they were all paid with celestial stones. Yin Yutian was speechless suddenly. Even if there were spiritual stones, they shouldn't be spent like this. Even with his identity, he didn't dare to be so wasteful. At this moment, he was even more convinced that the female practitioner he saw during the day was an old monster. Only an old monster could be so rich. "You go back. Don't tell anyone what I asked today." Waving his hand, Yin Yutian let Qing Shi go, but a glimmer of light rose in his eyes. If he could find the senior to participate in the gulling gambling battle, alas, why didn't I think of asking for a carrier rune from the senior? How can I find it? I'm afraid that the senior will be unhappy if I investigate without authorization. Yin Yutian regretted it. After hesitating for a long time, he finally gave up the idea of investigating Su Li. Although the gulling gambling battle was important, it was obviously not worth the loss to offend a mysterious mighty for no reason. Forget it. I'll leave this matter to my father. Before my father finishes his work, I have to make up for the deficit, so that the group of people in Huangxing Hall won't gossip. With a sigh, Yin Yutian left the matter about Su Li behind. There were two ends of the flower, one for each side. After Xian'an returned to Jiguang sect and showed his cultivation of Yuanying realm, he was immediately summoned by his father, Xian Jingju. Su Yu also put down what she was doing and hurriedly came out of the underground secret castle. I pay my respects to my parents. When Xian'an came to the study and saw that his parents were both there, he quickly knelt down and saluted. Before he completely knelt down, he was helped up by Su Yu. Looking at her son who was capable and calm, her eyes suddenly turned red. With tears in her eyes, she said angrily, "Get up. You have been out for more than 2 years. You don't come back to see me." Feeling his mother's deep care, Xian'an smirked, but Su Li's face flashed in his mind unconsciously. "Mom, I'm fine. You see, I have reached Yuanying realm when I came back this time." Su Yu wiped her tears and said with a smile, "Yes, my son has grown up. Your father is not as talented as you at this age. He is still struggling in Jindan realm. All right, don't make fun of me." Xian Jingju sat aside and watched. He couldn't stand such a scene the most. He sighed with emotion in his heart and quickly interrupted Su Yu and Xian'an's affection. Seeing that Xian'an and Su Yu separated, he looked serious and said solemnly, "And, since you have broken through Yuanying realm, it's time to shoulder part of the heavy burden of our Jiguang sect." Chapter 495. Xian'an was refreshed when he heard the words, and his eyes lit up. "Dad, are you serious?" Xian Jingju smiled and stroked his beard, saying, "When did I lie to you?" "Great." Xian'an was so happy that he almost jumped up. The old man standing aside shook his head and laughed. After all, the young lord was still a young man, and he couldn't hide things in his heart. "Come with me." Xian Jingju got up and walked into the house, and Xian'an immediately followed. Su Yu smiled and watched the father and son enter the house. When the figure disappeared in her sight, the smile on her face disappeared, and her voice was faint. "Grandpa Wu, don't spread today's matter." When the old man called Grandpa Wu heard the words, several inherited disciples who competed fiercely in the sect today flashed in his mind. He immediately changed his face and whispered, "I will." Xian'an followed Xian Jingju to the inner hall, and found that there was a different world inside, and there was a small study room. "Dad, this is," he said in surprise. Xian Jingju hesitated for a moment, and covered the file on the table without a trace. He said warmly, "This room is where your mother and I talk about important things in secret. There are many spies in the sect. Even if your father is the Lord, I have to be careful. Sit down." Xian'an nodded, not fully understanding, and sat down obediently on the side. Xian Jingju turned around and pulled out a file from the bookshelf. "These are the important things and plans of our Jiguang sect in recent years. You can come here to read when you have time. Remember, these files can't be taken out of this door, otherwise you may be killed. Also, don't reveal the existence of this room. Don't tell anyone except your mother and me." Xian'an's eyes were filled with horror, and he finally realized the importance. His excited mood was broken a little. He solemnly took the file and looked at it carefully. The first line that came to his eyes was "Bloody accident of Holy Spirit." This chronicle file actually began to record after the reincarnation mirror was broken. "In the 51st year of returning to the sect, I killed people and took over the position of Lord. There were still 3 remnants of the enemy at large, but in the 52nd year, I killed people. In the 53rd year, I married Yu Er. In the 54th year, I killed people." Sometimes Xian'an was shocked, and sometimes his face was hot. This account was obviously written by his father, and even his mother was recorded in it. He clearly felt that in the years when his father and mother got married, even the word murder was written with tenderness. Xian'an continued to read. In the next few decades, he spent nothing more than killing people and pacifying the Jiguang sect. He saw his father's hardships and his mother was bullied by others because of her birth. So, he simply killed her on the spot. He had never thought that so many cultivators would die in the hands of his parents, nor did he think that the cultivation world would be as cruel as others had said. He had lived a carefree and comfortable life for the past 500 years, but that was only because his parents had been supporting him from behind. His mind was shaken, and he flipped to the next page. It was no longer full of records, but only a line of scribbled words. In the 557th year, you gave birth to Lin named Xian'an. I have no regrets in this life. Xian'an's lips trembled, and his eyes were wet. Then he couldn't help grinning. How lucky was he to have such parents for his son? He pursed his lips and suddenly put down the file. He walked to Xian Jingju and knelt down. When he looked up, there was unprecedented firmness in his eyes. Dad, I will live up to your expectations. I will concentrate on practicing in the future and share your worries and difficulties. Seeing his son's true feelings, Xian Jingzhou's face was slightly moved, and a strange feeling that he had never felt before appeared in his heart. At this moment, he had an illusion that he was old. Well, Mayan has finally grown up. He laughed and showed a soft expression to his son for the first time. In the following days, in addition to practicing, Xian'an read the files in the small study every day, and Xian Jingju also put all the files about the Linli building into the universe ring. Although he knew that his son could not betray him, he didn't want Xian'an to step into the whirlpool for the time being. Xian'an was like a sponge, quickly absorbing the important events of the Jiguang sect in the past 1,000 years, and soon saw the recent years. On this day, he opened a new file as usual, and the 4 words Gulling Gambling Battle came into view. He, who could use the poisonous power insect at will, suddenly felt a little moved and checked it carefully. In the 1017th year, in the depths of the white stone relics, the burial ground of the immortal poisonous insect appeared. The Tianyin tribe wanted to swallow it alone. Our Jiguang sect, Yinquan sect, Shuejian sect and Shejian sect joined hands to stop it. They tied and agreed to decide the ownership of the immortal poisonous insect in the Gulling Gambling Battle 5 years later. There are very few poisonous insect practitioners in the sect. The practitioners who participate in the Gulling Gambling Battle must at least be in the Huashan realm. No one in our sect is qualified. So, we secretly issued a recruitment order, but no one is suitable. It's worrying. In the 1018th year, we recruited 3 suitable poisonous insect practitioners, but we refused because we were afraid of the revenge of the Tianyin tribe. In the 1019th year, we recruited a suitable poisonous insect practitioner, but we found out that he was a pawn of the Tianyin tribe and killed him. In the 1020th year, we got nothing. In the 1021st year, we got nothing. After the 1022nd year, there was still no result. Seeing this, Xian'an frowned. He was now 465 years old, and the 1022nd year was this year. It was also the 5th year of the agreement, but his father still didn't find a suitable poisonous insect practitioner. It was urgent to find someone. He finally felt the pressure of his father. Not only did he have to maintain the affairs of the sect, but he also had to struggle under the internal strife of the Tianyin tribe. My cultivation is too weak. Even if I get the poisonous power insect, I can only deal with ordinary peak of Yuanying realm at most. I haven't even reached the threshold to participate. Xian'an lamented in his heart. He took out a delicate carrier rune and put it in front of him. There was hesitation in his eyes. If he could invite the mysterious senior sister apprentice, he would have a great chance of winning. But if he used up a chance for this, would the senior sister apprentice have a bad impression of him? After thinking for a long time, Xian'an sighed and put away the carrier rune. After all, he didn't dare to pass his thoughts into it. There are still a few months before the appointed time. Instead of disturbing the senior sister apprentice rashly, It is better to ask my father about the progress. After all, this file was written a month ago. After making up his mind, Xianan put down the file and strode away. After asking Earl Wu about the whereabouts of Xian Jingju, he immediately went to the hall of the sect. At this moment, Xian Jingju sat in the main seat of the hall. He glanced at the elders in the hall and frowned. You really can't find a suitable poisonous insect practitioner? The leading elder in a white robe shook his head and sighed bitterly. Lord, you have seen it in the past 4 years. Poisonous insect practitioners are extremely rare, and they all cherish their lives. Today, the Tianyin tribe is powerful, and there are 2 immortal sons and goddesses above our heads. There is no possibility of decline in the future. As long as the poisonous insect practitioners don't intend to leave their hometown, they will not choose to fight against it. After the elder in a white robe finished speaking, the younger elder in black clothes on his side suddenly snorted coldly. Elder Fang, you really know how to boost others' morale and belittle your own. Just because it is difficult to find a suitable one, we should stop looking for one. The elder in a white robe looked pale. When did I say that I would not look for one? If you put the idea of making fun of me into looking for a suitable person, maybe you have already found a suitable candidate. That's right. Elder Li is unforgiving, but he has made the least contribution. I don't know how he has the face to mock Elder Fang. Nonsense. When has our Elder Li ever been lazy? It is clear that you are usually lazy, and your eyes are on the ground. The 2 factions headed by Elder Fang and Elder Li quarreled in the blink of an eye. Xian Jingzhou's face was cold, and his eyebrows were twitching wildly. Finally, when the voices of the 2 parties reached a higher level, he shouted loudly, "All of you, shut up." As soon as these words came out, everyone's face changed slightly in an instant. They covered their painful eardrums, and they were shocked. Lord's cultivation had improved again. The quiet place of the hall of the sect is like a vegetable market, noisy and chaotic because of you elders. What a scandal. Xian Jingju stood up, and his small figure blocked the candlelight behind the golden seat, which added a little pressure in everyone's eyes. But at this moment, a young man's clear voice came. I'm Xianan, Lord. Xian Jingju was slightly stunned, and the anger in his heart disappeared. Why did this kid come to the main hall instead of reading in the study? He looked at the people standing in the hall who were silent, and felt impatient. He waved his hand with a cold face. Go back and reflect on your mistakes. Elder Fang and Elder Li felt like being pardoned, and thought that the young lord came at the right time. They hurriedly retreated, and left in the blink of an eye. Xian Jingju rubbed his aching eyebrows. The 2 elders had been at odds with each other for hundreds of years. If it weren't for their good strength, he would have killed these 2 who didn't know the rules. However, there was no one in the sect. Xianan pushed the door and walked in. His shadow dragged a long trace on the ground of the hall. He looked at his father in the hall, and his irritation had not faded. He saluted respectfully. Seeing that there were no outsiders around, he straightened up and said, Father, what are you worried about? Xian Jingju waved his hand and didn't want to say more. He just asked, why do you come here instead of reading? Xianan straightened up and immediately replied, I read the Gulling Gambling Battle. This year is the last year. How is the progress? Not bad. You have learned to care about the food of the sect. You have made progress. Xian Jingju temporarily suppressed his irritation, nodded with appreciation, and said, it's okay to tell you about it. You have also seen the record in the file. There is no suitable person so far. If there is no candidate after 3 months, our Jiguang sect can only give up. At that time, he could only let Wen Tingshan take the risk. He was secretly nervous. Xian was not surprised when he heard this, but he struggled more in his heart. After hesitating for a moment, he finally said, I have a candidate on my side, and I want to hear your opinion. On your side? Xian Jingju couldn't help laughing. This kid didn't know that Qiu Zhen had secretly followed him when he was practicing outside these years. Didn't he know who he had contacted? Among them, there was not even one in the Huashan realm, let alone the poisonous insect practitioner in the Huashan realm. He was probably cheated by someone. Don't show off. You are only in the Jindan realm. How can you make friends with the poisonous insect practitioner in the Huashan realm? Don't make trouble for the sect. Thinking of this, Su Li went downstairs to pay the bill and went to the Huangxing Chamber of Commerce. Today, Qing Shi happened to be on duty again. Unfortunately, he was already followed by a middle-aged practitioner with white eyebrows who had an extraordinary identity. Because he was appreciated by Yin Yutian, he had changed from an ordinary manservant to a steward who specialized in serving distinguished guests. However, when he inadvertently looked back and saw Su Li's figure, his body suddenly shook. He waved his hand to find another manservant in cyan clothes and said, "This is a distinguished guest. I happen to be in a hurry. Take good care of her and don't neglect her." The manservant who was summoned was stunned when he heard the words, and then he was ecstatic. He hurriedly beckoned the middle-aged practitioner with white eyebrows to leave. The middle-aged practitioner with white eyebrows frowned slightly, but he didn't say anything and followed them casually. After all, these servants of Huangxing Hall were all very humble, and it was the same no matter who led the way. When Qing Shi saw the middle-aged practitioner leave, he immediately breathed a sigh of relief. He quickly appeared in front of Su Li before she chose the manservant, and said with a sincere smile, "Dear guest, you are here again." Su Li recognized Qing Shi, and her face was slightly relaxed. "It's you. What a coincidence. I don't want the spiritual jades of the 5 elements this time. I will buy all the rare spiritual jades of your Huangxing Hall." It was not the first time for Qing Shi to contact Su Li. Even if Su Li's request was more strange, he immediately nodded and reached out his hand. "Dear guest, this way, please. I will take you to the Tianzi Hall. If you like them, tell me the quantity, and I will arrange them immediately." Su Li also felt relieved when she heard the words, and smiled slightly. "That's good." Qing Shi's heart skipped a beat, and he hurriedly led the way in front. But he felt pity in his heart. The senior's smile was so charming, but her face was too ordinary and she was a little cold. Not long after, Qing Shi took Su Li to the Tianzi Hall last time. Su Li glanced over the counter and looked carefully. In addition to the 5 elements, the spiritual jades also had many strange attributes such as wind, thunder, yin, and yang. Su Li couldn't guess their real functions, so she simply turned her hand and took out a universe ring from her sleeve, threw it to Qing Shi, and ordered, "Except for the spiritual jades of the 5 elements and the ordinary spiritual jades of the 5 elements, the rest are the same as last time. Buy 1,000 of them." Qing Shi took the ring, and his divine awareness scanned it full of celestial stones. He was shocked and didn't dare to neglect. He immediately took it and was about to arrange it. But at this moment, the middle-aged practitioner with white eyebrows came in under the leadership of a manservant and bumped into him. "Here! You are here!" The middle-aged practitioner with white eyebrows narrowed his eyes, and his voice was flat, but it made Qing Shi's forehead covered with a layer of cold sweat. There were many Tianzi halls in Huangxing Hall. Why did this person appear here? He was so unlucky. Qing Shi was anxious and didn't know how to answer. When the middle-aged practitioner with white eyebrows saw Su Li in the hall, he immediately raised his eyebrows, stepped over Qing Shi, and walked in with a majestic manner. Su Li saw him, but she just didn't want to talk to him. But sensing that this person was approaching, she couldn't continue to ignore him, so she turned around and looked at him. He is so young, at most 500 years old. The middle-aged man with white eyebrows was shocked, and the famous talents of the Tianyin tribe and the other 4 sects flashed in his mind, but he couldn't match them. His face immediately darkened. "Why did you steal my guide?" Qing Shi panicked when he heard it. He leaned over and knelt directly on the ground. In the astonished eyes of the ordinary manservant, he begged for mercy. "Senior, please forgive me. It was this junior who was possessed and wanted to curry favor with you. It wasn't this female guest trying to snatch you away." Su Li was puzzled. When she heard this sentence, she immediately understood what was going on. For her, it was not a trivial matter, but for Qing Shi, it was a great disaster. Thinking of this, Su Li changed her face and clenched her fists. Fellow practitioner, this is just a misunderstanding. Although Qing Shi is not considerate, he brings convenience to me. I will compensate you on his behalf. How about that? Seeing that Su Li was so easy to talk to, the middle-aged man with white eyebrows didn't keep a straight face anymore, and his tone eased. I see. But since you can make the administrator of Huangxing Hall curry favor with you, you must have a distinguished identity. May I know where you work? I don't know you. Su Li shook her head and smiled. I come from another big region. It is normal that you don't know me. The middle-aged man with white eyebrows nodded and turned away. Qing Shi was relieved when the matter was over. He looked at Su Li gratefully and immediately went to purchase spiritual jades for Su Li. After a while, he hurried past the warehouse with the universe ring in his hand and was about to go to the VIP room where Su Li waited. But he found a familiar figure standing in front of him. Senior. Qing Shi's face turned pale when he saw the middle-aged man with white eyebrows blocking the door. The middle-aged man with white eyebrows chuckled and flicked his fingers. A white poisonous insect flew into Qing Shi's eyebrows. Qing Shi's smart eyes instantly became dull, and he said, I don't know the origin of that female guest. I only know that she is as rich as a country. Young Lord calls her senior, but her bone age is very young. When the middle-aged man with white eyebrows heard the words as rich as a country, he felt ridiculous. You are just a slave who has never seen the world. The wealth of a cultivation country is equal to that of a whole top-grade sect. She is just a first-rank female practitioner. He glanced at the universe ring in Qing Shi's hand and directly grabbed it. He scanned it with his divine awareness, and his disdainful look changed instantly. So many. Countless celestial stones. He had never seen so many celestial stones. These celestial stones are enough for me to practice to pass nature's tests. He gasped twice, and his heart beat violently. At this moment, the greed instantly drowned the reason in his eyes, and a fierce light flashed in his eyes. In the VIP room, Su Li was still meditating. Suddenly, she was awakened by a messy footstep. When she looked up, she immediately saw a flustered manservant in indigo clothes. She held back her tears and said, Senior, something happened. Chapter 497. In front of the warehouse of the Huangxing Chamber of Commerce, many stewards formed a circle. Yin Yutian looked gloomily at the corpse that had been sucked dry on the ground. He could vaguely recognize his identity from the withered face and outline. Qing Shi. Someone dared to commit murder in the Huangxing Chamber of Commerce and killed the steward of the Chamber of Commerce. How dare you? Yin Yutian was shocked and angry. His father was worried about the gulling gambling battle and handed over the affairs of the Chamber of Commerce to him. He didn't expect such a big mistake. Excuse me. The distinguished guest in charge of Lord Shire is here. At this moment, the voice of a manservant in indigo clothes sounded outside the crowd. Yin Yutian immediately turned around and looked up at Su Li. He was moved instantly and walked quickly to Su Li to salute. Others were shocked when they saw this. Who was this woman? Why was the young lord so respectful to her? Su Li frowned slightly and reached out. The universe ring beside Qing Shi's corpse automatically flew into her hand. She scanned it with her divine awareness and found it was empty. All the celestial stones had been transferred away. She flicked her fingertips and the ring flew into Yin Yutian's hand. She said lightly, Young lord of the Yin family, how do you explain this? Yin Yutian had already seen the situation in the ring. Now he was questioned by Su Li. His heart sank slightly and he cupped his fists. The Huangxing Chamber of Commerce will definitely investigate this matter to the end. We will never let you suffer any loss. Su Li looked slightly relaxed. That's good. I believe that the deduction skill of the Huangxing Hall can't even handle this trouble. Of course. Yin Yutian secretly breathed a sigh of relief. He looked calm and replied, within a month, the Huangxing Chamber of Commerce will give you a satisfactory explanation. As compensation, the spiritual jades you need this time will be provided free of charge. What do you think? As he said, He handed out the ring with the spiritual jades and the ring that had been looted. Su Li took it and scanned it with her divine awareness. There were a lot of spiritual jades in it. She nodded with appreciation and said, "Your Chamber of Commerce is really worthy of being the first in Qingshui Circle. I will wait and see. Take care, senior." Yin Yutian saw Su Li out of the gate of the Chamber of Commerce with a gloomy face. He called the trembling servant around him and suppressed his anger. "Find the Elder of Deduction. I want to kill him." The servant nodded in fear and immediately went to find the elder. Yin Yutian was still angry, but he didn't know what he had done. His father, Yin Ju, the first elder of the first. "Ha ha ha, your noble young master is decisive and has the air of a general. He will definitely be a talent in the future." In the hall on the top floor of the Huangxing Chamber of Commerce, the furniture arrangement was not as gorgeous as imagined. Except for the elegant tent, the emerald green decoration was full of a sense of simplicity compared with the shops on the lower floor. In the hall, on a table carved with jade and emerald, 2 cups of steaming hot tea were placed, and the fragrance of the tea lingered in the air. At the side of the table, 2 elegant middle-aged men dressed in white and purple daoist robes sat facing each other. Their temperaments were shockingly similar, and every movement they made was filled with elegance. One couldn't feel the killing intent that cultivators should have. The middle-aged man in a white Taoist robe had gentle eyebrows and eyes, and he looked amiable. He was Yin Ju, the first elder of Huangxing Chamber of Commerce in Tianyi City. Hearing what the purple-robed practitioner said, he immediately smiled and said, "My son is not talented enough to deserve such praise." Haha, although he said so, he was surprised in his heart. He didn't expect that when he went out to look for poisonous insect practitioners and helplessly handed over the affairs to his son, this boy changed his playboy style and managed the Chamber of Commerce in an orderly manner. "You flatter me, First Elder. You are so modest." The purple-robed practitioner picked up the teacup and took a sip. A light flashed in his eyes. "Unfortunately, we came back late, otherwise we could have prevented this disaster on the spot." Hearing that, Yin Ju still smiled and waved his hand carelessly. "We are doing business in the cultivation circle. There is no reason not to have trouble. Since it has happened, let's solve it later. You don't need to worry about it. The most urgent thing now should be the gulling gambling battle." The purple-robed practitioner nodded approvingly. "First Elder, you have a good mentality. I admire you. I came here for the immortal poisonous insect, and I will not fail you. I only hope that you can keep your promise and give me the immortal poisonous insect after it is done." Yin Ju immediately nodded with a smile. "You can rest assured about this matter. Our Huangxing Chamber of Commerce will not ruin our reputation for an immortal poisonous insect. In this case, I am relieved." The purple-robed practitioner raised his teacup. "Come on, I will use tea instead of wine to toast you." He could see that what Yin Ju said was not a lie. As one of the 4 peak holy sects, how could Huangxing Hall break its promise for an auxiliary immortal GU? In the face of not enough benefits, the holy sects were extremely concerned about their faces. Although he didn't know why Huangxing Hall asked him, a rogue cultivator, to participate in the gulling gambling battle, it did not prevent him from getting benefits from it. An immortal poisonous insect, even if it was auxiliary, was a great wealth for him. Even if it was not suitable for him, he could buy a large number of cultivation resources. Moreover, even if he failed, he would not have to return the benefits he got from Yin Ju. He would not suffer a loss at all. Yin Ju also raised his teacup with a smile. He had a chamber of commerce in his hand, so he wanted to make money peacefully. However, it was the order from Huangxing Hall to participate in the gulling gambling battle, and he must find a rogue cultivator. It took him a lot of effort to find Kang Chang. No matter what the result was, he had dealt with Huangxing Hall. Even if he failed, the main sect could not find any fault. The two of them each had their own thoughts. In this kind of atmosphere, they actually had a feeling that they were having a pleasant conversation. However, such a harmonious atmosphere was soon destroyed. "First Elder, you are back." The door of the hall suddenly opened, and an old man with white beard and hair and a pale face rushed in, with blood on the corner of his mouth. Yin Ju frowned slightly. Before he could reprimand the old man, he heard the old man say directly, "Young lord asked me to infer the murderer, but I pushed it to the gulling gambling battle, and I even suffered a backlash." What? Yinju's face was slightly gloomy, and the shaking teacup stopped between his palms. He, who was also profound in the realm of deduction, suddenly had a premonition in his heart. This gulling gambling battle would definitely not be as simple as it seemed. In the blink of an eye, another month passed. The 5-year period of the gulling gambling battle had come to an end, and all the forces participating in the battle immediately gathered to the Huangxing Chamber of Commerce. 5 years ago, all the forces argued endlessly about the location of the gulling gambling battle. Finally, Huangxing Hall intervened and forcibly chose the location in the Huangxing Chamber of Commerce. They specially closed the 3rd floor of the Chamber of Commerce and repaired the Spirit Consolidation Tactical Matrix, which was enough to block the fluctuations of fighting between practitioners at the peak of nature's test without leakage. With the intervention of the holy sects, the Tianyin tribe and other forces naturally did not dare to say no, and immediately agreed. In the early morning of this day, before the sun went out, the gate of the Huangxing Chamber of Commerce was surrounded by practitioners who came to watch the gambling battle. Those who entered not only required their cultivation to be higher than Jindan realm, but also had to pay 1,000 high-grade spiritual jades. Even so, the venue on the 3rd floor was still full. In addition to the practitioners waiting to enter, almost 80% of the practitioners came to watch the fun. After all, it was rare to see the practitioners of the top sects in Jiuli region. "Get out of the way. The people of Jiguang sect are here. The people of Jiguang sect come so early." As the exclamation fell, the extremely crowded crowd actually made a way for them. Xian Jingju, with a cold and solemn face, came aggressively with many elders of the sect. Soon, they entered the venue under the envious eyes of many casual practitioners. "They are so impressive. How good it would be if I could also join such a big sect. Stop dreaming. Hurry up and get to work." When Xian Jingju entered the venue on the 3rd floor, he saw Yinju greeted him with a smile. "Long time no see. Lord Xian, how are you?" Xian Jingju chuckled, and there was no praise or derogation in his tone. Elder Yin's ability to make money is as good as before. "Lord Xian, you flatter me." Yinju cupped his fists and took it as a compliment. When he saw Xian and behind Xian Jingju, he said in surprise, "Is this Xianan, the young lord of your sect? He has reached Yuanying realm at such a young age. He is really extraordinary. Maybe he can get a good ranking on the Tianjiao list in the next Tianjiao list." Xian Jingju enjoyed it very much, so he didn't want to be sarcastic anymore. His face eased and he said with a smile, "This kid is usually very lazy. Fortunately, he has become more sensible recently. As his parents, I really worry about him a lot." "That's right. Recently, my son has also learned to share this old man's worries. This is truly a great relief to me." When Yinju talked about his son, his face unconsciously showed a trace of gentleness. At this moment, Xian Jingju had an illusion that he had found a bosom friend. He pulled Xianan over and said, "This is your Uncle Yin, the first elder of Huangxing Chamber of Commerce. Come and greet him." After he finished speaking, he didn't hear Xianan's answer. Xian Jingju frowned, but he saw that his son was absent-minded. He didn't know where his mind had drifted. Xianan. Xian Jingju was still praising Xianan before. Now Xianan's performance made him feel that he had lost face and was about to get angry. Yinju quickly stopped him and said with a smile, "It doesn't matter. It's just a trifle." Xianan woke up with a start and realized it later. He hurriedly saluted and said, "Uncle Yin, please forgive me. I didn't mean it just now. I was rude." Yinju nodded to him and was still kind. He cupped his fists to Xian Jingju and said, "Today, I have a lot of things to do in the gulling gambling battle, so I can't accompany you any longer. Lord Xian, please take a seat." Xian Jingju nodded, "First Elder, you are busy. I will take a seat myself." Yinju cupped his hands and left. Xian Jingju took everyone to sit on the largest seat in the west. Looking at the seats, only the Tianyin tribe was bigger than the Jiguang sect. However, now the seats of the Tianyin tribe and most of the sects were empty. Except for them, No other force had come. Xianan saw that his father didn't blame him again after sitting down. He secretly breathed a sigh of relief, but he couldn't help showing a sense of loss. In the past month, their Jiguang sect had tried their best, but they still failed to find a suitable poisonous insect practitioner to participate in the battle. He secretly glanced at his father, who had closed his eyes to rest, and squeezed the carrier rune in his hand. There was still the last glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Senior sister apprentice, will you come?" Chapter 498. An hour later, the golden crow hung high in the sky, making the surface of the street golden and elongating a thin shadow. Su Li stopped and looked at the familiar gate of the Huangxing Chamber of Commerce. Gulling gambling battle, her eyes flashed with a hint of interest. Xianan didn't explain clearly in the message. She happened to be in Tianyi City and didn't leave. It was okay to go in and have a look. After that, she stepped up to the crowd of casual practitioners in front of the gate. She waved her hand and pushed the crowd away insensibly. Soon she squeezed to the front. "Fellow practitioners in the cultivation circle, the venue of the gulling gambling battle is full. It's useless to wait any longer. It's better to leave." The serious guard of the Chamber of Commerce responded coldly, but it couldn't extinguish the enthusiasm of many casual practitioners. "Let us go in. Even if I have to stand and watch, I am willing to." Seeing that the situation was gradually out of control, the guard's face changed slightly and he retreated to ask for instructions. After a moment, he smiled and said, "Our Lord said that if you want to stand and watch, you can. But you have to pay an entrance fee of 10,000 high-grade spiritual jade." "What? Isn't this bullying? I am standing and watching. Why should I be charged 10 times the entrance fee? Your Huangxing Chamber of Commerce is too much." "Yes." The guard was scolded, but he was not annoyed and continued, "Our Lord also said that the space on the 3rd floor is limited, and we can't force you. There are only 1,000 standing tickets. If you don't want to leave, we Huangxing Chamber of Commerce never force you to buy or sell." As soon as he said that, everyone immediately stopped talking. The next moment, countless spiritual stones were thrown to the guard. Seeing this, Su Li didn't bother to use other means. After handing in the spiritual jades, she mixed into the crowd and entered the 3rd floor of the Chamber of Commerce. The messy discussion suddenly reduced by 90%, and many practitioners who had just reached Jindan realm showed horror. The pressure of nature's test, Su Li's eyes flickered, and she saw the acquaintances sitting in the first place of the VIP seats, including Shen Jingju, who was resting with his eyes closed. The Lord of Jiguang sect. Su Li glanced at Xianan, who was also sitting in the VIP seat. She quickly retracted her gaze and looked at the seats of other sects. At this moment, a dignified voice echoed throughout the hall. "Cultivators, please take your seats. For those cultivators who haven't managed to buy a seat, our Chamber of Commerce has already prepared a cushion. Follow the guiding light to find your seat." Then she saw a weak suction from the jade rune she got from the guard. She immediately let go of the jade rune and let it float to a futon on the stairs not far away. Seeing this, she disregarded the gazes of the surrounding cultivators and sat down slowly. But before she could settle down, she heard a young man's voice, which was extremely soft and almost crying, coming from beside her ear. "This, big sister, can you exchange places with this little brother?" Su Li turned her head and saw a young and extremely beautiful teenager looking at her for help. His thin figure was held in the arms of a fat female practitioner with a ferocious face. His skin was rolling, and the love and possessiveness in his eyes made Su Li feel goosebumps even though she was in a stable state of mind. Sensing Su Li's gaze, the fat female practitioner suddenly turned her head and showed a fierce look. "Bitch, what are you looking at? You dare to peep at my boy toy? I will dig out your eyes." Su Li's eyes were indifferent. She turned her head and ignored him. Even if the little boy looked very pitiful, she did not have the slightest pity. The cultivation circle was cruel, and she was not a saint, not even a kind person. She didn't have so much time to meddle in other people's business. Seeing Su Li's indifferent performance, the teenager's eyes were watery. Tears slipped down his little face, and his soul also trembled slightly. Su Li suddenly opened her eyes and stared at him. In the fierce female practitioner's eyes, she pointed at the middle of the teenager's eyebrows. The more familiar soul fluctuation came, and Su Li was slightly surprised. This teenager was Tang Lei in the reincarnation mirror. Her memory of Tang Lei was not strange at all, and could even be said to be profound. The first time they met in the reincarnation mirror, he was bullied by many childs in Yunjing. His body was smeared with shit-smelling herbs, and he was also poisoned by his brothers. He was fat. Later, he was cured by Su Li, and he even persuaded his grandfather to rebel. Your bone age is 58. You have reincarnated, but your memory is gone. Su Li's eyes were complicated. She had met many old friends since her rebirth, but it was the first time that she had reincarnated. The teenager only felt a coolness between his eyebrows. Although he did not recall all kinds of things in his previous life, his mind was extremely clear. When he heard Su Li's words, his eyes widened. Do you know me in my previous life? The teenager's first thought was that it was absurd. Even though he knew a lot of things about the cultivation circle under the indoctrination of the fierce female practitioner, he always felt that many of those things were deceptive. By the way, Master, the teenager suddenly panicked. He raised the heavy arm on his shoulder and shook it off fiercely. When he looked back, he saw the fierce female practitioner giggling and nodding to him. She has no chance to bully you anymore. Su Li's gentle voice came, which made the teenager's heart tremble. Then he saw the ordinary-looking sister stand up and point to the rush cushion. The ugly female practitioner naturally stood up and made way for her. She sat on the rush cushion and bowed her head without saying a word. The teenager was stunned and suddenly understood. He looked at Su Li with tears instantly. His lips trembled, and his hands grasped Su Li's sleeves tightly. He was so excited that he did not know what to say. Since you have the opportunity to come in, you can see the grotesque and dazzling cultivation circle. It is much more wonderful than you think. Su Li did not comfort him, but said in a calm tone. The teenager had endured for decades under the fierce female practitioner, but he could still maintain his state of mind and was not so unbearable. After a moment of adjustment, he quickly calmed down, but the gratitude in his eyes was so strong that it could hardly be dispersed. Suppressing the throbbing in his heart, the teenager glanced at the practitioners around him who seemed to be unaware of it, and then glanced at the many VIP seats who did not notice the change at all. Finally, he understood what kind of practitioner he met. He worded it in his mind for a moment, and finally only said cautiously, "Little brother. Tang Li, sister, do you really know my previous life?" Su Li smiled slightly. "You are still surnamed Tang. You look much better now than in your previous life." Tang Li blushed, scratched his head, and whispered embarrassedly, "Really? I was caught by my master at the age of 15 and became like this after eating a lot of things. Besides, I have not grown taller for decades, and I have always maintained the appearance of a 15-year-old. Otherwise, I should look the same as I did in my previous life, right?" How could Su Li not see that Tang Li's body had been deliberately modified? Although he was forcibly promoted to Jindan realm and had a long life, he had no strength to truss a chicken. His foundation was completely destroyed. Even if she wanted to cure him, it would take a lot of energy. Fortunately, Tang Li was only 58 years old, and she had enough time to save him. Seeing Su Li thinking, Tang Li, who had learned to observe people's expressions, suddenly quieted down. He looked at the extremely spacious arena in the center of the field, and a person appeared. It was Yin Ju, the first elder of the Huangxing Chamber of Commerce. A big shot. His eyes widened slightly, and he watched the bustle freely for the first time. He had only heard of such a person from his original master, but he had never seen him. Gulling Gambling Battle, the 5-year agreement, starts today. Yin Ju glanced at the audience, and his steady voice came into everyone's ears. It was short and powerful, gentle and dignified. I don't think I need to say more about the reason of the gambling battle. This battle is about life and death. The winner will get the immortal poisonous insect sound acquaintance. As he said this, he waved his sleeve, and a black shell suddenly appeared on the round stone platform at the highest point of the arena. Wow, there was a small discussion in the venue. It turns out to be an immortal poisonous insect. No wonder the 5 major sects are fighting for it. No, this immortal poisonous insect is unpopular. Although its effect is magical, it can't attract the 5 major sect. I know. It's that year. Tang Li didn't know what an immortal poisonous insect was, but he clearly felt that his sister beside him stopped breathing for a moment when she heard these 3 words. My sister is very concerned about the immortal poisonous insect, sound acquaintance. Such thoughts flashed through his mind, and his eyes turned. He searched for the rumors he had heard from the vicious female practitioner over the years. He had been groveling for decades, and he had long been accustomed to pleasing others. Even if the sister was by no means the original master, he did so subconsciously. Sound acquaintance, sound acquaintance. Suddenly, Tang Li's eyes brightened. He pulled Su Li's sleeve and whispered, "Sister, I know. But the original master once said that this matter is of great importance, and it can't be heard by others." Su Li heard the intermittent noises around her, and her mind was fluctuating. Seeing that Tang Li's words didn't seem to be false, she waved her hand to open a miniature bounded domain, and said softly, "Go ahead." Tang Li immediately poured out everything he knew. It's related to a secret force in the cultivation circle, Leanly Building. No one knows who founded the Leanly Building, but many holy sects are very afraid of it. They hate it very much, but they dare not to act rashly. I heard from the original master that sound acquaintance is an opportunity to draw the snake out of the hole. If the Leanly Building doesn't snatch the poisonous insect, it means that everything is. If the poisonous insect falls into the hands of the Leanly Building, Tang Li scratched his head when he said this. I just follow the words of the original master, and I'm not very clear about some things. That's enough. Su Li smiled, and Tang Li couldn't help but feel cold in his heart when he saw the smile. You tell me. Su Li said again. Tang Li was confused, but he saw that the original master sitting on the rush cushion next to him turned her head obediently and continued in a low voice. The Leanly Building reappeared in the world, and holy sects were frightened and afraid. They took this opportunity to set up sound acquaintance to test the authenticity of the Leanly Building. After all, the owner of the Leanly Building has been dead for many years. Ha ha ha. When Su Li heard this, she laughed softly, which made Tang Li's blood freeze again. Little Xuanan, you really helped me a lot. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.